Hey there. Welcome. Settle in for a while. Wherever you are right now, I want you to let this space be a pause in your day or in your night. Maybe you're sitting in a chair, the dim light of a lamp behind you. Maybe you're lying under a blanket, phone in hand, the world quiet, except for the sound of this voice. I'd like to know, where are you listening from? A city high in glass towers, a quiet village by a river, somewhere in between. Every listener leaves a trail of places in my mind, little dots on an imagined map, and together they tell me how far this story can travel. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. This is not a tale to rush through. It's one to drift into, like slipping into warm water. We are going to journey back, far back, into a world without neon lights, without engines humming in the distance, without the endless glow of devices keeping your mind alert long after the body has begged for rest. The place is the far north of Europe. The year could be 850, or perhaps 100 years later. It doesn't matter which. The nights are the same. Here, in the Viking Age, the land is shaped by the sea and the seasons. Deep fjords cut into the earth like silver scars. Pine forests press in around small settlements. In winter, the sun does not climb far, and darkness lingers like a second skin. In the center of a small settlement stands a longhouse, its wooden walls weathered, its roof of turf and timber heavy with frost. Step inside, and you are in a single great room, lit by the steady burn of the hearth. Smoke drifts upward, curling in the cold air before slipping out through a hole in the roof. You smell pine resin, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of drying herbs hanging from the beams. The people inside are gathered on raised wooden platforms, built into the longhouse walls. By day, these platforms serve as benches for work and talk. At night, they become beds, covered with layers of straw, coarse wool blankets, and animal furs that smell faintly of the forest. This is where families, servants, and sometimes guests sleep together, not as strangers separated by walls, but as one household breathing the same warm air. Tonight, the outside world is silent under snow. The wind moves across the fjord, carrying with it the sharp scent of salt. But in here, the air is thick with warmth. Shadows dance along the wooden beams. A child rests against her mother's side, her hair catching the orange glow of the fire. An older man sharpens a small knife, his hands slow and practiced, the sound of the blade against the whetstone soft and steady. The day has been long, not in the way we measure days now, with meetings and messages and fixed hours, but in the way of a people whose lives follow the arc of the sun. Work began in the pale light of morning, and ended as dusk deepened into night. There were nets to mend, firewood to split, livestock to feed, food to prepare. Now the body is heavy, but the mind is calm. There is no rush to squeeze in another task. The rhythm of life is steady, circular, and the night is not an interruption but a friend. Here, sleep is not chased, nor fought, nor broken into restless fragments by anxiety. It comes when it is ready, like the tide filling a bay. The people of the Viking Age know that the night is divided, not into one long block of unconsciousness, but into two gentle waves. They call it first a seven, the first sleep, and a na seven, the second sleep. The first will take them into the deep part of the night, 4 hours or so. Then there will be a waking time, a stillness between sleeps, when the fire is tended, the animals checked, quiet words exchanged. We in the modern world might call such waking insomnia and fret over it. But here it is expected, woven into the pattern of life. The in-between hours are not wasted. They are used for small, careful things, mending a fishing line, whispering a prayer, or telling a tale that only belongs to the darkness. And when the work of that quiet hour is done, the second sleep arrives, as sure as the first. Imagine lying there on the platform, the fur against your cheek, the breathing of others all around you, the fire glowing at the edge of your vision. Outside, the night is absolute. There is no glow on the horizon, no hum of distant roads. The darkness wraps you in a way modern life can rarely provide. And in that darkness, the body understands what to do. It lets go. This is where our story begins. In the hush of a Viking night, when the snow falls outside and the hearth fire glows inside, and the people history remembers as fierce raiders and explorers are, for these hours, simply sleepers. Their dreams are untroubled, their rest complete. They have, without ever seeking it, found a way of sleeping that we, with all our science, all our comforts have almost forgotten. And so we will follow them, night after night, through seasons and years, to see how the rhythm of their lives made them some of the most well-rested people in history. The darkness in the north was not like darkness elsewhere. It was not a shade or a dimming, but a presence, a vast, deep thing that settled over the land and stayed. In the far reaches of Scandinavia, winter could mean only a few hours of daylight, a pale and watery sun hanging low over frozen hills before sinking again into night. For weeks on end, the stars ruled the sky, and the moon, when it came, was a quiet guest. For the people of the Viking Age, this darkness was not an enemy. It was part of the cycle, as natural as the tide or the turn of the seasons. They moved within it, adapted to it, let it shape the way they lived and rested. Modern science tells us that true darkness is one of the most powerful signals for sleep our bodies can receive. It allows the brain to release melatonin, the hormone that whispers to every cell, "It is time to rest." In a world before electric light, the Vikings lived in perfect harmony with that signal. Step into a longhouse at night, and you would find only a handful of light sources. The hearth in the center glowed low, the flames banked to conserve fuel through the long hours. A candle made of tallow or beeswax might flicker nearby, casting a soft amber halo. An oil lamp, its flame fed by rendered fat, would send out a gentle reddish glow. This light was warm in tone, almost like sunset, a far cry from the blue-white glare of modern bulbs that jolts the brain into thinking it is still day. Light, in the Viking Age, was precious. It took effort to make, to gather beeswax, to render fat, to carve lamps and store wicks. No one wasted it on flooding a room with brightness. Instead, the night was allowed to be dark. Even the moonlight, when it filtered through a gap in the shutters, was gentle, and in that darkness, the body was free to follow its own rhythm. In the depths of winter, people here did not sleep for 8 unbroken hours. They practiced what we now call biphasic sleep, 2 main periods of rest separated by a waking time. The first sleep might begin not long after sunset. Imagine it. You lie down on the platform, your head resting on a small, firm pillow filled with wool or moss. Around you, your family settles in, shifting under their layers of fur. Outside, snow presses against the walls. The wind hums in the timbers. Sleep takes you quickly, deeply. 4 hours later, you wake. It is not sudden, not anxious, just a gentle rising into awareness. Others are awake too. Someone stirs the embers back into a low flame. Someone else steps outside to check the animals. The air inside the longhouse smells of smoke, wool, and the faint, sweet bitterness of dried herbs hanging from the beams. This is a time for quiet talk, for mending a fishing net, for a whispered prayer to the gods. The mind is calm here, caught between the depths of sleep and the stirrings of the day. Modern researchers have found that in this waking period, the human body releases more prolactin, a hormone that brings a sense of peace and contentment. Perhaps that is why these hours were valued, even treasured, rather than rushed through. Here in the north, they were not considered a problem to fix. They were simply part of the night. After an hour or two, drowsiness returns. The fire is banked once more, and everyone settles down again for the second sleep, Anar Svev. This stretch carries them into the pale light of morning, the air in the longhouse growing colder, until the first hands of the day stir the embers into flame again. This pattern, so natural to them, is alien to us now. We live in a world of fixed schedules and glowing screens, a world that tells us any waking in the night is wrong. But for the Vikings it was right. It was how life was meant to flow. The seasons themselves shaped the rhythm. In summer, when the sun barely dipped below the horizon, sleep came in shorter bursts. Heavy wool curtains were hung over the sleeping areas to block the midnight sun, and bedding was thinned to keep from overheating. The nights were alive with work, travel, and fishing, for in the north, light was opportunity, and it would not be wasted. In winter, the opposite held true. Darkness stretched so long that the night itself had to be broken into 2 sleeps, or it would feel endless. Even the moon had its influence. On full moon nights, the light would spill across the snow, turning the outside world into a silver-blue landscape. Some sagas mention that people were more restless then, more likely to wake and talk or work in the in-between hours. Modern science quietly agrees. Studies have shown that even without seeing the moon, Our bodies can respond to its cycle, sleeping less deeply during the full phase. But here, in the Viking Age, there was no struggle against these patterns, no attempt to force the body into a single rigid block of sleep. The night was allowed to be what it was, shaped by the darkness, the moon, and the turning of the seasons. When we imagine the Vikings, we often see them in motion, rowing longships, swinging axes, crossing oceans. But there is another picture, quieter, softer, a winter night, the hearth burning low, the darkness deep and complete, and the people resting, some in their first sleep, some awake in the stillness between, all of them part of a rhythm we have nearly forgotten. And it is in this darkness, in this pattern of life and rest, that the secret to their remarkable sleep begins to reveal itself. The waking hours between first and second sleep are a kind of hidden world, a pocket of time that existed outside the day's noise, outside the rush of work, and outside the deepest currents of dreaming. In a Viking longhouse, these hours were neither hurried nor idle. They were filled with the sort of tasks that could be done slowly, by the glow of the fire, without breaking the peace of the night. The hearth, always the heart of the home, would be stirred first. A hand, steady from long habit, would push the embers together and feed them a few small logs. The crackle of dry pine would rise softly, sending a new warmth into the air. This was not the roaring blaze of daytime cooking, but a slow, careful flame meant to last until morning. Around it, the shadows shifted on the wooden walls, stretching and shrinking as the fire found its rhythm. Some would tend to the animals. A man might step outside, his boots crunching in snow, his breath a pale cloud in the cold. The night air in the far north had a stillness that could feel almost alive, so quiet you could hear the creak of the ice on the fjord, or the distant groan of a pine tree heavy with snow. In the byre the animals stirred at his presence, a low sound from a cow, the shifting of hooves on straw. He would check the water, add feed if needed, and return to the longhouse with the cold clinging to his cloak. Inside, others would sit close to the fire, hands busy with small work. Women might spin wool into thread, the spindle turning smoothly between practiced fingers. Men might repair fishing nets or smooth the haft of an axe. These were not chores in the modern sense, but quiet acts of care for tools, for clothing, for the household itself. There was also time for words. In some homes, this was when stories were told. The sagas that now survive in written form once lived in voices and memories, passed down in the firelit dark. A father might tell of his father's voyages. An elder might speak of a winter when the ice came early and left late. Children, half awake under blankets of fur, would hear these tales in a haze of warmth and drowsiness, the voices weaving into their dreams when second sleep came. Not all talk was for children's ears. Some conversations happened in the low voices of adults, plans for the next day's work, discussions about trade or matters of the household that needed privacy. The middle of the night was good for this, when the world was still and the mind unburdened by the day's labor. There were moments for intimacy too. In the privacy afforded by darkness and the natural division of the night, couples could find time for closeness away from the bustle of the household. For those who held to old beliefs, the hours between sleeps also held a kind of spiritual weight. The threshold between one day and the next was seen as a liminal time, a space where the boundary between the seen and unseen was thin. A short prayer might be offered to the gods or to the land spirits. A charm might be whispered over a sleeping child. And yet, for all the quiet work and talk, there was no sense of urgency. This was not a time stolen from sleep. It was part of sleep, part of the night's natural breathing. Modern research has found that in these hours the body is bathed in a hormonal calm, prolactin flowing in greater amounts than during the day, bringing a sense of contentment and soft focus. It is easy to imagine the Vikings feeling it too, without knowing its name, without needing to explain it. When the body's drowsiness returned, the tasks would be set aside, the spindle would be stilled, the nets folded, the embers tucked under ash for slow burning. One by one, people would settle back into their places on the platform. The furs would be pulled close, the warmth shared. Outside, the night still held fast, the stars cold and bright, the moon casting silver light over the snow. This second sleep would carry them to the edge of dawn. In winter, that dawn might be late, the sky slowly turning from black to deep blue to a thin grey light. But inside the longhouse, The people would wake feeling as if the night had given them exactly what was needed, not just rest for the body, but a quiet time for the mind, and a space for the household to exist together in stillness. These midnight hours were a balance between activity and rest, between silence and conversation, between the inner life and the shared life of the home. They were an inheritance from a world that moved with the seasons, a rhythm that modern life has almost entirely erased. And yet for the Vikings, they were as natural as the rising of the sun or the pull of the tide. In the next part of our journey, we will look closer at the space itself, the Viking sleeping environment, and how the longhouse, with its wood and straw and fur, created one of the most sleep-friendly places in history. The Viking longhouse was more than shelter. It was a living, breathing space, shaped by centuries of adaptation to a harsh northern climate. Every beam, every layer of turf, every plank of wood carried a purpose, and nowhere was that purpose felt more deeply than in the sleeping platforms, the heart of rest and recovery in the household. These platforms were built along the inner walls, raised off the floor by 40 to 60 centimeters. This kept sleepers away from the damp ground and closer to the warmth that pooled in the upper part of the room. During the day, the platforms served as seating and workbenches, but as evening drew on, they transformed into communal beds. There were no separate rooms for each person. Instead, the family, servants, and sometimes guests slept side by side in a shared warmth, the nearness of others, both a comfort and a necessity. The construction of these sleeping areas was simple but deliberate. Thick planks or split logs formed a sturdy base. At some sites, archaeologists have found that the base sloped slightly, with the head end higher than the foot, a small detail that may have helped with breathing and circulation. Upon this wooden frame, the first layer was laid, fresh, dry straw or hay. Chosen with care, the straw acted as both cushioning and insulation. It was replaced regularly, keeping the bed clean and free from pests. Over the straw came coarse woven cloth, often vartham, the rough wool fabric that was a staple of Viking textile production. This layer stopped the straw from poking through, added warmth, and gave a soft surface for furs and blankets to rest upon. The final layer was the one most prized: animal skins and furs. These could be from sheep, goat, reindeer, or in the homes of the wealthy, bear or wolf. A fur was more than comfort. It was insulation, a shield against the penetrating cold of the long winter nights. A good fur could last for years, its leather backing softened by constant handling, its warmth as reliable as the fire itself. Each bed space was arranged with care. Higher status individuals slept in the warmest spots, often nearest to the hearth. Sometimes their section of the platform might be raised a little higher, or given a curtain for privacy. Children often slept between adults, safe in the shared heat. In the coldest months, everyone might sleep closer together, the household becoming a single living bundle of warmth. Headrests were firm, often small leather or textile cushions stuffed with wool, feathers, or dried moss. To our modern sense, used to sinking into soft pillows, these might seem too hard, but firm support kept the head aligned with the spine, reducing strain. It's a detail modern orthopedic specialists would quietly approve of. Temperature regulation happened naturally. The straw base allowed air to circulate, preventing dampness. Wool and fur trapped warmth without trapping too much moisture, keeping sleepers dry and comfortable. If it grew too warm, a rare event in the northern winter, a sleeper could simply push aside a layer of fur. In summer, bedding was thinned, heavy furs were stored, replaced by lighter wool cloth. Curtains of thick fabric could block the midnight sun, creating a darkness that fooled the body into believing night had truly come. In Iceland, where turf walls were common, sleeping spaces were sometimes built into the thickest part of the wall itself, a deep alcove that stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. Everything about the Viking sleeping platform served two purposes: comfort and survival. A good night's rest was not luxury. It was strength for the day to come when work was physical, the sea unpredictable, and the weather an ever-present challenge. Imagine lying there after the midnight waking, your head resting on a firm pillow, your body nestled into the spring of straw and the softness of fur. Around you, others shift in their sleep. The crackle of the fire is a steady heartbeat in the dark. The scent of wool, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs fills the air. Your body is supported, warm, and dry. The darkness is complete, sleep returns easily, wrapping you once again in its heavy, dream-rich calm. The Vikings did not need to understand the science of melatonin or spinal alignment. Their beds were the product of observation, necessity, and centuries of refinement. They built for their climate, their materials, and their way of life. And in doing so, they created sleeping environments modern researchers would call near perfect. In the next part of our journey, we will follow the scent of those hanging bundles of herbs above the sleeping platforms and see how Viking healers used plants to coax the mind and body into deep, unbroken rest. Above the sleeping platforms, tied to the beams or tucked into small baskets, bundles of plants swayed gently in the rising heat of the hearth. Their scents were subtle, earthy, floral, sometimes sharp, and in the stillness of the longhouse night, they would mingle with the smell of wool, straw, and smoke. These were not decorations. They were part of a quiet, ancient practice, the use of plants to guide the body toward rest. The Vikings were no strangers to the healing power of herbs. Their world was one where the boundary between medicine and magic was thin, where knowledge of plants was passed down through families, often held most closely by women who served as healers, midwives, and keepers of household remedies. Archaeological digs in Norse settlements have unearthed seeds and dried fragments of plants with well-known calming properties: valerian, hops, linden flowers, chamomile, and lavender among them. Valerian root was perhaps the most potent of these. Dug from the soil in late summer, its scent was strong, almost musky, and its effect unmistakable. Modern science tells us that the compounds in valerian act on the brain's GABA receptors, quieting neural activity in a way not unlike certain sleep medications, but without the harsh side effects. A healer might dry the root, crush it, and steep it in hot water, producing a bitter tea to be drunk before bed. Hops, too, had their place. While best known now for flavoring beer, the dried cones of the hop plant contain oils that soothe the nervous system. A Viking might drink a mild hop-infused ale after the evening meal, the low alcohol content and the plant's sedative qualities working together to ease the mind towards sleep. Sometimes, hops were simply tucked into small cloth pouches and placed near the head. Their scent alone was thought to help the mind drift. Linden flowers, delicate and pale, were brewed into a sweet, fragrant tea. This was the drink of comfort, offered to children restless with fever, or to elders whose sleep grew light with age. Chamomile, too, was valued for its gentle touch. A handful of its dried blossoms in hot water would release a scent that calmed the breath and softened the edges of thought. Lavender was rarer, not native to the north, but traded through distant networks. In small amounts, its sprigs might be burned gently, the smoke curling through the air and carrying its calming perfume into every corner of the longhouse. For the wealthiest households, lavender was a mark of both luxury and care. The methods of using these plants were varied. Infusions and teas were the simplest, drunk slowly in the hours before first sleep. Stronger remedies might be steeped in warmed ale or mead, both to draw out the plant's compounds and to make the bitterness easier to bear. Herbs could also be added to the hearth at night, a pinch of crushed valerian or hops tossed onto the embers, the smoke rising into the rafters to be breathed in by the household as they settled into bed. Some healers used what we might now call herbal pillows, small sacks filled with dried calming herbs, sewn from linen or wool, placed under or beside the head. The warmth of the sleeper's body would release the scent gradually through the night. These remedies were often accompanied by ritual. The Norse did not separate the physical and the spiritual, as we do today. A healer might murmur words over the cup as it was poured, calling on the protection of the gods or the watchfulness of the household spirits. In some homes, a carved amulet might be set beside the bed, its runes invoking peace and rest. Whether or not the gods were listening, the effect was real. The comfort of belief, layered over the pharmacology of the plants, made sleep come more easily. Season played its part in this too. In the long nights of winter, when sleep was plentiful, gentler herbs like chamomile and linden might be favored, to soothe without over-sedating. In summer, when the midnight sun threatened to stretch waking hours too far, stronger herbs like valerian or hops were more often used, helping the body find its night even when the world stayed bright. Modern researchers looking at these plants confirm much of what the Vikings already knew. Valerian shortens the time it takes to fall asleep, hops deepen rest, chamomile and linden calm the mind and relax the muscles, lavender lowers heart rate and blood pressure. All of them work more gently than modern pharmaceuticals, making them safe for nightly use. And perhaps most importantly, the Vikings used them within a life already shaped for sleep, in darkness, in quiet, after physical labor, and in harmony with the body's natural rhythms. Picture it, the longhouse in winter, the hearth embers glowing, the air rich with the scent of dried plants warming above the fire. A woman pours a steaming cup into a carved wooden mug, hands it to her husband with a faint smile. He drinks, feeling the bitterness spread over his tongue, the warmth down his throat. In the shadows, children drowse under firs. Somewhere outside, the wind moves over the frozen land. Inside, the herbs do their work, and sleep arrives as it always does, without resistance, without hurry. In the next part, we will leave the rafters of herbs and the soft glow of the fire to explore another quiet secret of Viking rest, the way they ate, and how their food, its timing, and its very nature worked hand in hand with the night to bring deep, unbroken sleep. The day's work in a Viking household was long and physical, and so was the appetite it built. But unlike our modern habit of eating late into the evening, the Vikings ended their main eating hours well before night fell. This simple habit, born from practicality, may have been one of their quietest but most powerful aids to deep sleep. Most households followed a rhythm of two main meals. The first, taken after morning chores and tasks, might come mid-morning, hearty enough to fuel the day's labor. The second, the evening meal, was eaten in the late afternoon or early evening, often while there was still daylight to see by. By the time the first sleep began, several hours had passed since the last mouthful, giving the body time to work through digestion before settling into rest. Modern research tells us that eating too close to bedtime can disturb sleep, delaying the onset of deep rest and interrupting the body's ability to move smoothly through its cycles. The Vikings, without knowing the science, avoided this entirely. Their diet itself also leaned toward foods that supported restorative sleep. Fatty fish, salmon, herring, mackerel, came from the sea and rivers, rich in omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin D, both of which have been linked to improved sleep quality. Meat, from livestock, wild game, and birds brought protein and the amino acid tryptophan, a building block for serotonin and melatonin, the body's natural sleep chemicals. Grains like barley, rye, and oats were staples, ground into flour for bread or cooked into porridge. These complex carbohydrates provided steady energy through the day, without the blood sugar spikes and crashes that can leave the mind restless at night. Oats in particular carried their own small gift. They contain a natural form of melatonin. Dairy played a role as well. Milk and the cultured dairy product skyro offered calcium, another nutrient tied to the brain's ability to convert tryptophan into melatonin. In the cold months, warm milk or whey drinks could be taken before bed, both soothing and nourishing. Fermented foods were common, not because they were chasing probiotics as we do today, but because fermentation was one of the best ways to preserve food. The side effect was a diet rich in gut-friendly bacteria, which modern science has begun to link to better sleep through the gut-brain connection. Fermented fish, sourdough bread, and preserved vegetables all played their part in this unseen web of health. Honey was the main sweetener, used sparingly, without the constant flood of refined sugar we know today. The Viking body avoided the blood sugar swings that can jolt a sleeper awake in the middle of the night. Alcohol was present, in the form of ale or mead, but everyday ale was low in strength, far less likely to disrupt sleep cycles than modern strong drinks. Heavier drinking was mostly reserved for feasts, which were as much about storytelling and social bonds as food and drink. In winter, the evening meal might be a thick stew of fish or meat with grains and root vegetables, eaten by firelight as snow piled against the longhouse walls. In summer, fresh greens, berries, and milk would join the table, but the timing remained the same. Long before darkness came, even in the bright months when night was barely there at all. Imagine such a meal, the sound of a ladle against a wooden bowl, the steam rising from a broth scented with herbs, the warmth in your hands as you lift it to your mouth. You eat until your hunger is gone, not until you are heavy and slow. The firelight dances on faces around you. Talk drifts between the day's work and tomorrow's plans. And then, with the meal finished, there are hours of gentle tasks and talk before sleep calls you to the platform. By then, the body is ready, not full and busy with digestion, but calm, its energy spent and its needs met. Season to season, the diet shifted with what the land and sea offered. In the short, bright summers, fresh food and lighter meals matched the long hours of activity. In the dark winters, rich stews, dried fish, and preserved grains provided the dense nutrition needed to keep warm and strong. But in every season, the relationship between food and rest was in harmony. This balance, eating well, eating early, eating what the land gave, worked silently alongside all the other factors of Viking life to make their sleep deep and restorative. They did not eat to fall asleep. They ate to live well, and living well prepared them for sleep without effort. In the next part of our journey, we will step away from the table and into the day's work itself to see how the relentless physical activity of Viking life, from rowing long ships to grinding grain, left the body primed for the kind of rest that cannot be faked. From the first grey light of morning to the deepening shadows of evening, a Viking's day was threaded through with movement. Not the deliberate, isolated bursts of exercise that modern life encourages, the trip to the gym, the scheduled run, but a constant, steady, purposeful exertion that shaped the body's strength and the mind's readiness for rest. The land and sea demanded it. Fields had to be ploughed, even in soil heavy with stones. Nets needed hauling, often heavy with the day's catch. Timber had to be cut, shaped, and carried. Animals required tending, no matter the weather. Every task was physical, and often repetitive enough to build a rhythm into the body's very muscles. Men and women alike carried this workload. A shipbuilder might spend his day levering great timbers into place, striking them with an axe until the grain yielded to his design. A farmer's wife might grind grain into flour with a quernstone, her arms and shoulders working in a circular motion for hours. Both forms of labor left the body tired in the truest sense, not drained by nervous energy, but fulfilled by the simple exchange of effort for result. This was not a life of constant sprinting. The work was a mix, lifting and hauling that built strength, long walks and rowing that built endurance, quick bursts of effort woven between long stretches of steady motion. Modern science tells us this combination, resistance and aerobic activity, does more than shape muscle. It deepens the body's slow-wave sleep, the stage in which physical repair takes place. The outdoors was the only workplace. Whatever the season, whatever the weather, work was done in the open air. In summer, this meant long hours under a high sun, with the wind carrying the scent of salt or pine. In winter, it meant cold air on the face, breath visible in the dim daylight, and fingers stiffening before the fire could warm them again. Exposure to natural light, especially in the morning, helped set the body's internal clock, regulating the cycle of wakefulness and rest. The Vikings did not think about circadian rhythms, but they lived in perfect accord with them. The rhythm of the year shifted their movements. Summer was the season of long days and hard work, voyages across open water, building and repairing ships, fishing far from home, bringing in hay for the animals before the weather turned. Winter slowed the pace, but never to idleness. Snow had to be cleared, tools maintained, wool spun, leather worked. The heaviest labor might ease, but daily activity remained. This seasonal variation allowed the body time for recovery, without slipping into the sedentary habits that dull both strength and sleep. Evening brought its own rhythm of slowing down. As the sun dropped low, the heavy labor gave way to lighter tasks, carving, weaving, repairing. This gradual unwinding from hard work to softer effort to stillness is exactly what modern sleep researchers recommend to prepare the body for rest. There was no sudden leap from bright, busy work into bed. The shift was gentle, giving the mind and body time to meet the night halfway. And work was not always solitary. Much of it was done in groups, rowing in unison, lifting a beam with several pairs of hands, working side by side in the fields. Shared labor brought not just efficiency but connection, and that connection soothed the mind. Studies now tell us that people with strong social ties sleep better, wake less often, and fall asleep more quickly. The Vikings, without realizing it, were building those bonds daily. Imagine a day in midsummer. A crew rows a longship down a fjord, the oars dipping in and out of the water, in perfect rhythm, the smell of the sea in every breath. The boat cuts through the waves, the muscles in arms and backs straining, but the stroke is steady. When the shore is reached, the men haul nets or goods up the beach, working together until the task is done. By evening, The body is heavy with honest fatigue, the kind that seeps into the bones and pulls the eyelids down without effort. Or picture a winter day inland. A woman walks the length of the field with a heavy bucket of water, the snow crunching under her feet, her breath clouding the air. She feeds the animals, chops kindling, then returns inside to spin wool by the hearth. The motion is smaller now, the day's largest tasks complete, and by the time darkness settles, her body is ready for the deep, anchoring rest that comes from work well done. The Vikings lived in a balance modern life rarely grants us, the perfect mix of exertion, fresh air, light, and gradual rest. There was no need to tire themselves out with artificial exercise at night, no need to fight the body into sleep. The day prepared them naturally for what the night would bring. In the next part of our journey, we will step away from the physical and look inward, into the mind of a Viking, to see how their beliefs, attitudes, and approach to life created a mental state that welcomed sleep instead of resisting it. If the body was prepared for sleep by the work of the day, the Viking mind was prepared by the way they understood life itself. In their world, rest was not an indulgence or a waste of time. It was a necessity, an expected part of existence, as natural as the rising of the sun or the turning of the seasons. The sagas and poems they left behind carry glimpses of this attitude. The Havamal, a collection of wisdom attributed to Odin himself, contains verses that speak of balance. One warns against sleeping the morning away, reminding the listener that too much rest can dull ambition. Another cautions against lying awake all night, worrying over things that cannot be changed. Together, these verses show a middle path. Rest enough to keep the body and mind strong, but not so much that life passes you by. This balance freed them from a modern plague, sleep anxiety. In our time, we lie in bed, calculating how many hours remain until morning, worrying over every moment of wakefulness. The Vikings did not. Waking in the night was expected. Dreams were welcomed, not feared. Rest was something the body knew how to do without being managed. Their worldview made this easier. Fait, word in Old Norse, was a constant presence in their thinking. Life was a weave of threads, each person's path already shaped by forces greater than themselves. That did not mean they were passive. Vikings were known for action and courage, but they accepted that some things were beyond control. This acceptance loosened the grip of worry. If tomorrow's outcome was already written, then lying awake trying to shape it in the mind was pointless. Better to rest, to be strong for whatever the day brought. Dreams were more than idle wanderings of the mind. In the sagas, they appear as messages, warnings, or glimpses of what was to come. A dream might foretell a change in weather, the outcome of a journey, or the death of an enemy. They were not dismissed as nonsense. A wise person paid attention to their dreams, and some sought to shape them through charms or prayers before bed. This respect for dreaming gave the night a kind of purpose. To sleep was also to enter a realm of signs and meanings. Archaeologists have found amulets carved with protective runes, sometimes placed near sleeping areas. These might guard against bad dreams, wandering spirits, or the ill will of others. Whether or not they had a supernatural effect, they offered comfort, a sense that the sleeper was watched over, that the night was a safe place to let go. Modern psychology would call this a cue for safety, something that calms the nervous system and eases the way into sleep. Evening life in a longhouse encouraged mental unwinding. After the last tasks were done and the meal eaten, the household might gather by the hearth for storytelling. The flicker of firelight, the slow pace of the tales, the familiar voices, all of this eased the mind out of the day's work and into a softer, more receptive state. The stories might be heroic or tragic, but they were carried on the calm rhythm of a practiced voice, a rhythm that could draw a listener towards sleep without them even noticing. There was little in their world to pull the mind into the kind of constant stimulation we face today. No flickering screens, no stream of news from faraway places, no artificial light to convince the brain that day was still here. The sounds of the night were predictable, the crackle of the fire, the sigh of wind through the walls, the breathing of others nearby. These were cues the body could trust, signals that it was safe to rest. Even the way Vikings handled disputes and worries made a difference. Problems were dealt with openly, often in public gatherings. There was no habit of letting grievances stew in silence for months. This did not mean life was free of conflict, far from it, but it meant that some of the quiet, gnawing mental unrest that keeps us awake today had fewer places to grow. To lie down in a Viking longhouse at night was to do so with a mind uncluttered by much of what troubles us now. There were worries, of course. The safety of a voyage, the success of a hunt, the threat of enemies, but these were part of the fabric of life, not hidden traps for the mind. Fate would play its hand. The sleeper's role was to be ready for the day when it came. Picture it. You are lying under the heavy warmth of furs, the smell of wood smoke in your hair. Around you, the steady breathing of your family fills the room. Somewhere in the dark, a small carved amulet rests by your head, its surface worn smooth by hands that have held it for years. The fire is a low glow, shadows reaching long up the wall. Your mind drifts, not to what might go wrong, but to the dreams you might see, and what they could mean. In the next part of our journey, we will step back from the people themselves and look at the larger picture, the way their connection to the natural world, to darkness and light, shaped every detail of their nights and made their rest a thing modern life can barely imitate. In the Viking world, light and darkness were not things to be controlled, they were forces to be lived with. The sun, the moon, and the shifting seasons dictated the rhythm of life. There were no switches to flip, no way to flood a room with brightness at midnight or keep daylight at bay in the morning. The sky itself was the keeper of time, and the people moved according to its will. In winter, darkness reigned. In the far north, the sun might rise only briefly, casting a dim glow across snow-covered fields before sinking again. For weeks, the land lay under a blanket of night, broken only by a few hours of pale daylight and the glimmer of stars on clear nights. This darkness was not feared. It was embraced as a time of slower work, of gathering close to the hearth, of sleeping longer and deeper. The body, freed from artificial light, followed its natural cues. Melatonin levels rose with the setting sun and stayed high through the long night, guiding sleep without resistance. The longhouse itself worked with this darkness. Its walls were thick, and its windows, if it had any, were small. These openings could be covered with animal skins, oiled cloth, or shutters, keeping the inside dim even during the brighter hours. At night, the only light came from the hearth, or a handful of candles, their flames soft and golden. This warm-toned light had little effect on the body's readiness for sleep, unlike the blue-white glare of modern LEDs, which tricks the brain into thinking it is still day. In summer, the challenge was the opposite. The midnight sun could turn the sky pale for hours on end, especially in the far north where darkness might not come at all. Yet the Vikings adapted here too. Thick woolen hangings were draped over sleeping spaces, blocking the sun's intrusion. Sleeping alcoves might be tucked into the deepest parts of the longhouse, away from any sliver of light. In turf-walled houses, beds could be built into recessed nooks where the air was cool and the darkness complete. They also adjusted their habits to the season. In summer, sleep might be shorter, broken up by the long days and the work they allowed, but this did not lead to exhaustion. The abundance of light and activity was balanced later, in winter, when the darkness invited longer hours of rest. Over the course of the year, the body's needs were met in full. Even the moon had its part in the night. Full moonlight reflecting off snow could be bright enough to read by, and the sagas mention restless nights during these phases. Some households used this extra light for work, mending tools or preparing supplies. Others simply let it be, talking quietly in the glow until sleep returned. Modern studies show that lunar cycles can subtly affect sleep patterns, something the Vikings seemed to notice and adapt to without complaint. Light was never wasted. Oil lamps and candles were precious, their fuel requiring time and effort to produce. A beeswax candle might be saved for special occasions, while everyday light came from tallow candles or small clay lamps burning animal fat. These flames gave off a warm, low light that kept shadows deep and corners dim, a kind of illumination that invited the eyes to soften and the mind to quiet. Darkness, on the other hand, was complete in a way we rarely experience now. There were no distant street lights, no glowing signs, no spill of light from a neighbor's window. Step outside the longhouse on a moonless night, and the blackness would feel almost solid. The stars, unchallenged by human brightness, blazed overhead in their thousands. In that darkness, the body felt safe to surrender to sleep, its most ancient signal for rest answered without interference. This deep connection to the natural cycle of light and dark gave Viking sleep a stability modern life struggles to regain. Today, we battle our own clocks, trying to force sleep into a narrow window that ignores the signals of the sky. The Vikings didn't have to think about it. The turning of the earth, the tilt of the seasons, the glow of firelight, and the hush of true darkness all worked together to tell them when to rest and when to rise. Picture the winter night again, the long house sealed against the cold, only the faint orange breath of the hearth lighting the room. Outside, snow falls silently under a black sky. Inside, the people sleep in two steady waves, waking briefly in the middle of the night, then returning to dreams until morning. This harmony with darkness is a thread that runs through everything: their beds, their meals, their work, their health. In the next part, we will step back inside that darkness to focus on what it meant to sleep, not alone, but together. The communal sleeping arrangements that gave the Vikings both warmth and safety, and how this closeness shaped their nights. In the Viking longhouse, sleep was not a solitary act. It was a shared experience, a closeness that brought warmth, security, and a subtle bond between those who lived under the same roof. In a world without private bedrooms or walls dividing one sleeper from another, the night belonged to the whole household. Along the longhouse walls, raised platforms stretched for several meters, wide enough for several people to lie side by side. By day, these were benches where work was done and meals eaten. By night, they became the beds for everyone in the home: family, workers, guests, and sometimes travelers passing through. The arrangement was not random. The head of the household and their spouse would usually occupy the best position, close to the central hearth, where warmth was steady and smoke less likely to drift. Children might sleep between parents or other relatives, a natural guard against the cold and the unknown. Lower status members of the household took places farther from the fire, but never alone in the dark. In the cold months, when the wind pressed against the walls and frost crept across the timbers, the longhouse became a shared cocoon of heat. Body warmth was as important as blankets and furs. People slept close enough to hear one another breathe, the gentle shifting of bodies blending with the crackle of the fire. In those conditions, sleep was not just a matter of comfort, it was survival. This closeness also carried a kind of watchfulness. In a household of many, there was almost always someone lightly awake, especially during the natural waking between first and second sleep. If danger approached, a sudden storm threatening the animals, a prowler or fire, it was far more likely to be noticed. The sagas tell of times when a family was saved because someone rising in the night to stir the hearth heard a sound outside and raised the alarm. In this way, the communal sleeping arrangement acted as a natural security system. The presence of others also eased the mind. Modern research confirms what instinct has always told us. Humans sleep more deeply when they feel safe, and safety is often found in numbers. The warmth, the steady sounds of breathing, the knowledge that help was close if needed, all these quieted the nervous system and allowed sleep to deepen. Children, especially, benefited from this closeness. Sleeping beside parents or other family members gave them a sense of security that shaped their rest long into adulthood. Privacy was scarce, but not absent. Some wealthier households had fabric hangings or wooden partitions that could be drawn around certain parts of the platform, especially for the head of the household. Couples might find moments for intimacy in the middle of the night waking period, when others were busy with their own quiet tasks. The lack of complete privacy did not seem to cause shame or resentment. It was simply the way life was ordered, and everyone understood it. In summer, when the weather allowed, sleeping arrangements sometimes spread out. A few might take their rest in smaller outbuildings or even outside under the stars, but the sense of shared space remained. Winter brought everyone back together, gathering around the hearth like spokes around a wheel. This communal sleep was not a sign of poverty or primitivism. It was a practical, adaptive way of living in the north. It made efficient use of heat, strengthened social bonds, and kept the household safer. The idea of sleeping alone in a separate sealed-off room, what many in the modern world consider normal, would have seemed strange, even dangerous to them. Imagine lying on such a platform, your place marked by the curve of your body in the straw, your neighbor's shoulder just inches away, the shared blanket pulled high. The night outside is vast and cold, but in here, the air is thick with warmth, breath, and the low murmur of someone whispering by the fire. You are not alone, and that is the point. In the next part, we will stay on these platforms but look closer at their physical craft, the way they were built, layered, and arranged to cradle the body through hours of deep, steady rest. The Viking sleeping platform was a simple thing at first glance, a raised bench running along the wall of the longhouse, but its design and layering showed a quiet understanding of comfort, warmth, and durability. Built with the same care given to boats and barns, it was more than just a place to lie down. It was where the day ended, where dreams began, and where the household passed nearly a third of its life. Most platforms were made from sturdy planks of pine or oak, chosen for their strength and availability. These boards rested on a wooden frame, often supported by legs or directly fixed into the wall beams. The height was practical, high enough to be clear of the coldest air pooling on the earthen floor, but low enough for easy climbing in and out. Beneath the platform, space was sometimes used for storage, sacks of grain, tools, or bundles of herbs that benefited from the warmth drifting down from above. On top of the boards came the bedding layers. The base was almost always straw or hay, freshly cut in summer, and replaced regularly to keep it clean and springy. The straw provided softness and insulation, creating a cushion of trapped air that helped hold body heat through the night. Over this base might be laid an animal hide, its tough, smooth surface keeping the straw in place and adding another layer of warmth. Then came the blankets and coverings, heavy woolen cloth, woven thick on the household loom, or multiple sheepskins stitched together. In wealthier homes, furs from fox, bear, or reindeer might top the bed, their dense warmth unmatched in the coldest months. These coverings were communal, shared by those lying side by side, making every layer more efficient at keeping in heat. Pillows, when they existed, were modest affairs, small sacks stuffed with feathers, wool, or even dried grasses. Many slept without them, resting their heads on an arm or a folded cloak. In some finds from Viking sites, archaeologists have uncovered wooden headrests carved into simple curved shapes, less for softness and more to keep elaborate hairstyles intact. The platform's location within the longhouse mattered. The prime spot was near the hearth, but not so close as to be choked by smoke. Smoke holes in the roof drew much of it away, but on still nights it could hang low, and a bed too near the fire might mean coughing through the night. Those farthest from the hearth often had the thickest bedding, and more bodies packed close to keep warm. Over time, the bedding absorbed the scents of the household: smoke, wool, herbs, and the faint sweetness of straw. This was not unpleasant. It was the smell of safety, of home. For those who travelled or raided, returning to that familiar scent was a comfort as deep as the warmth itself. The bedding was not neglected. Straw was replaced, hides aired out in the sun, and blankets beaten clean of dust and ash. In summer, the layers might be thin to keep sleepers cool. In winter, extra hides or cloaks were added, and sometimes even warmed stones from the hearth were wrapped and placed at the foot of the bed to take the edge off the cold. The very act of lying down on such a platform was part of the rhythm of the day. One would feel the give of the straw beneath, the weight of the coverings above, the heat radiating from nearby bodies. The boards creaked softly as someone shifted, and the fire's glow danced faintly on the underside of the roof beams. It was a sensory signal that the work of the day was over, and the body could release itself to rest. In a way, these beds were small pieces of the larger Viking approach to life. Functional, efficient, adapted perfectly to their environment. They did not need ornate design or excessive softness. What they built was exactly enough, and in that balance lay the secret to long, undisturbed sleep. In the next part, we will leave the wooden platform and step into the air outside to see how the climate itself, with its bracing cold and shifting seasons, shaped the very quality of Viking rest. The land of the Vikings was a place of contrasts: biting winters, brief but brilliant summers, winds that could rattle the bones, and still nights, so calm the air seemed to sleep. This climate shaped every part of their lives, and their sleep was no exception. The cold, in particular, was not simply endured, it was harnessed. Winter nights in Scandinavia could plunge well below freezing, with the darkness stretching for 16 to 18 hours in some regions. For many today, such a chill would seem an enemy to rest, but for the Vikings, it was a companion. The human body naturally sleeps more deeply in cooler conditions. The drop in temperature signals the brain to release melatonin, helping it drift into slow-wave sleep, the stage where physical repair and restoration take place. The Viking longhouse, for all its warmth, was never overheated. The hearth provided comfort, but heat was localized, and the air farther from the flames often stayed cool enough to nudge the body toward deeper rest. The cold also encouraged the use of layered bedding, furs, wool, hides, which trapped warmth close to the body while allowing excess heat to escape. This microclimate under the covers kept sleepers comfortable through the night, reducing the chance of waking from overheating or chills. And because sleeping was communal, body heat from others added a steady, natural warmth that worked in harmony with the cool air just beyond the bedding. In the warmer months, the climate brought its own benefits. The long summer days encouraged early rising and active days outdoors, flooding the body with natural light and fresh air, both powerful regulators of the sleep-wake cycle. Even if summer nights were shorter, the activity of the day, combined with the mild cooling that came after sunset, allowed for quick and restorative rest. The wind, too, played its part. In coastal settlements, the steady rhythm of waves and the low hum of wind through wooden beams acted as a natural lullaby. Inland, the rustle of trees, the crack of frost on cold nights, or the patter of rain on turf roofs gave the night a texture that was familiar and soothing. These were not intrusions but constant companions, sounds that signaled safety in their predictability. The absence of modern insulation meant that the longhouse breathed with the weather. Air circulated through cracks and seams, carrying away smoke, moisture, and stale air. While this might have let in drafts, it also kept the atmosphere fresh, reducing the buildup of dampness that could lead to illness or discomfort. Sleep in such an environment was always accompanied by the feel of real air on the skin, cool, clean, and tinged with the scent of the season. In extreme cold, the Vikings adapted without hesitation. More layers, more bodies close together, heated stones wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed, and sleeping platforms piled high with straw for extra insulation. They understood that comfort was not about absolute warmth, but about balance, the right mix of heat near the body and coolness in the surrounding air. For those who traveled, especially on long voyages, the climate's lessons were carried onto the sea. Sleeping aboard a longship meant braving raw winds and damp air. But the same principles applied: layer the bedding, use furs, sleep close, and let the cold itself become a partner in rest rather than a threat. If you stepped outside a longhouse on a winter's night, you would feel the sharp bite of air on your cheeks, see your breath bloom like smoke, and hear the muffled silence of snow under the stars. That air, that cold would follow you back inside, clinging to your skin until you slid under the furs and felt the warmth gather around you. In that moment, the contrast was perfect. A harmony of cool air for the face, deep warmth for the body, and a stillness so complete, it seemed the world itself was sleeping. In the next part, we will turn from the climate to the rhythms of the year, exploring how the Viking seasonal calendar, with its festivals, work cycles, and periods of rest, created a natural ebb and flow in their sleep patterns that kept their bodies and minds in lasting balance. The Viking year was a wheel, turning through seasons not just of weather but of work, rest, and celebration. Each spoke of this wheel shaped the way they slept, lengthening the nights in some months, shortening them in others, and always keeping the body in step with the land and sky. Winter was the season of rest. After the autumn harvest and the slaughter of animals for winter stores, the pace of life slowed. The darkness was long and deep, the fields bare, and the seas often too dangerous for long voyages. Inside the longhouse, work shifted to quieter tasks, mending nets, carving tools, weaving cloth, and preparing goods for trade. The nights were long enough to allow for generous sleep, often in two distinct phases, the first and second sleeps, with the quiet hours between used for talking softly, tending the fire, or sharing private moments. This was the time when the body recovered from the exertions of the summer and autumn, when the mind could drift into long dreams without the pull of early rising. Spring brought renewal, and with it, earlier mornings, seeds needed sowing, boats repairing, and journeys planned. Sleep hours shortened, naturally, as the daylight stretched further into the evening, but it was not an abrupt shift. The body had months to adjust, the growing brightness waking people earlier, without jarring alarms or forced schedules. Melatonin production, guided by the changing light, simply began to slow earlier in the morning, and the body followed willingly. Summer was the season of labor and light. In the far north, the sun barely dipped below the horizon, and true darkness could be rare. Farmers worked long days in the fields. Sailors rowed and sailed for hours without pause. Sleep might be shorter, but it was still deep. The body, worn from hours of physical work, fell quickly into rest even with light outside the shutters. To keep that rest protected, thick hangings or sleeping alcoves were used to block the brightness. For many, sleep came in one long stretch. For others, it was broken into two or more shorter rests, taken whenever the day's tasks allowed. Autumn was a season of urgency, the gathering of crops, the preservation of food, the last long journeys before the seas turned dangerous. Days were still long, but the sun was already slipping lower, the nights growing cooler. This was a time of balance between work and rest, with enough daylight to finish the harvest, but enough darkness to encourage earlier nights. The seasonal calendar was also dotted with festivals and gatherings, moments when sleep gave way to celebration. Yule in the deep of winter, the midsummer feast, harvest festivals, all brought long nights of eating, drinking, and storytelling. But these were brief interruptions, and their effect on sleep was softened by the slower pace of the days that followed. Because the Vikings lived without the rigid, unchanging schedules of modern life, their sleep adapted naturally. There were no fixed hours of bedtime or morning that applied year-round. Instead, the length of the night itself decided when to rest and when to rise. Over the course of the year, the total hours of sleep balanced out, more in winter, fewer in summer, keeping the body in a natural cycle that aligned with the shifting world outside. This rhythm also meant they rarely experienced the chronic sleep deprivation so common today. Even in the busiest months, the combination of physical exertion, fresh air, and natural light cues meant that sleep, though shorter, was efficient and restorative. And when the slower seasons arrived, the body had time to recover in full. Imagine this turning wheel: long winter nights curled in warmth, spring mornings smelling of thawing earth, summer evenings when the light never truly fades, and autumn days rich with the scent of drying grain. Each season carries its own kind of sleep, its own pattern, and together they weave a whole life's rest. In the next part, we will turn from the seasons to the senses, exploring how the sounds, smells, and textures of a Viking night created an environment perfectly tuned for deep, unbroken rest. Night in the Viking world was not silent, but it was never noisy in the way we know today. Its sounds, scents, and textures were woven together into an atmosphere that prepared the body and mind for rest without effort. To lie down in a longhouse at the close of day was to step into a world of steady, familiar sensations, each one telling you, in its own way, that it was time to sleep. The soundscape was soft but alive. Closest to you was the steady rhythm of breath from those sharing the platform, a quiet chorus of inhales and exhales. Now and then someone would shift, the straw beneath them, whispering. From the hearth, a low crackle and pop marked the burning of logs, the embers sighing as they settled. Outside, the wind might press against the wooden walls or slip through the grass and moss packed into the roof. In coastal settlements, the faint roar of the sea could drift inland. Inland, it might be the hoot of an owl or the rustle of animals in the byre. These sounds were constant enough to be trusted, no sudden jolts, no mechanical intrusions, and the mind, hearing them, knew all was well. The air carried its own story. The smell of wood smoke was ever present, clinging to clothing, bedding, and hair. Beneath it was the clean, faintly sweet scent of dried straw warmed by the bodies above it. Wool and furs added their own earthy tones, mixed with the sharper notes of herbs hung to dry, sage, thyme, or yarrow, which also served to freshen the air and keep away pests. In the depths of winter, the air inside was tinged with the smell of stewing food or baking bread, drifting in from the hearth's cooking pots. These were not distracting smells but grounding ones, each tied to warmth, sustenance, and home. Touch played its part in quieting the body. The bedding was a mix of textures, the coarse weave of wool blankets against the skin, the smooth slide of a well-tanned hide, the deep, soft loft of furs pulled close in the coldest months. The straw beneath gave a faint rustle when you moved, reminding you of its presence without discomfort. Even the weight of the coverings had a calming effect, pressing gently against the body and giving a sense of being enclosed and secure, something modern science now recognizes as beneficial for deep sleep. The light of night was never harsh. In most cases, it came only from the glow of the hearth, a faint flickering amber that pooled in the center of the longhouse and left the edges in darkness. Candles or oil lamps were used sparingly, their flames small and steady. Shadows danced across the beams above, moving slowly with the fire's breath. This dimness told the brain what the sky outside already had, that it was night and the time for alertness had passed. Even temperature played its part in the sensory balance. The air was cool enough to keep the skin fresh, but not so cold that it bit. Under the bedding, warmth built quickly, shared by the bodies beside you. If a draught wandered through a gap in the wall, it was brief and passing, a reminder of the world outside without breaking the comfort of the cocoon within. For the Vikings, this sensory environment was not something crafted with intention. It was simply the result of living closely with the natural elements of their world. Yet every aspect of it worked in harmony to tell the body that it was safe, secure, and ready to rest. No earplugs, no blackout curtains, no machines to mimic nature's hum, just the unbroken familiarity of wind, fire, breath, and the scent of the earth. To close your eyes in such a place was to be surrounded by cues of safety, warmth, and belonging. The senses were not shut out but soothed, each one gently folded into the darkness until sleep took hold. In the next part, we will shift from the world of sensation to the world of the mind, looking closely at the role of dreams in Viking culture and how their belief in the meaning of dreams shaped the way they moved through the night. For the Vikings, sleep was not just a place of rest, it was a gateway. The hours spent beneath furs and wool carried them into another realm, one that was just as real to them as the waking world. Dreams were not dismissed as meaningless illusions of the mind. They were messages, warnings, glimpses of things past, present, and yet to come. In the sagas, dreams are given weight. A chieftain's wife might wake in the deep of night and speak of seeing a falcon circling above the hall, its eyes fixed on her husband. A sign, she would say, of coming danger. A farmer might dream of standing in a meadow where the grass was covered in frost, knowing in his heart that it foretold a poor harvest. These visions were not shrugged off. They were discussed, interpreted, and sometimes acted upon. The Vikings believed that the soul could travel while the body slept. In these wanderings, a person might meet the dead, speak to gods, or witness events far away. Such experiences could be prophetic, and it was considered unwise to ignore them. Skilled dream interpreters, often older members of the household or community, would listen carefully to every detail. The color of an animal, the direction of a journey, the weather in the dream, all these mattered. Certain dreams carried special weight. Dreams of blood, of storms, or of broken weapons could signal conflict or loss. Dreams of gold or clear water were considered fortunate. Meeting a figure known to be dead might be a warning or a blessing, depending on what was said. In some tales, the gods themselves visited sleepers, their words or presence carrying instructions for the days ahead. The waking between first and second sleep was often the time when dreams were remembered and shared, in the quiet of the longhouse. With the fire glowing low, one might turn to a neighbor and describe what they had seen, the images still vivid in the mind. Discussion was part of the process. Speaking the dream aloud was a way of seeking meaning, of deciding whether it was a passing fancy or something more. There were also ways to encourage certain kinds of dreams. Some might place an amulet beneath the pillow, a small pouch containing herbs like mugwort or juniper, believed to invite visions or keep away nightmares. Others whispered prayers to the Norns, the weavers of fate, asking for clarity in the night. Protective runes might be carved into wood or bone and kept close to the sleeping space, guarding the dreamer from harmful spirits. Nightmares were not taken lightly. They could be signs of ill fortune, the work of an enemy's magic, or the stirring of restless spirits. If a person suffered from repeated troubling dreams, they might seek the help of a seer or healer, who would perform rituals to cleanse the mind and ward off further harm. This deep respect for dreams gave the night a purpose beyond physical rest. To sleep was not just to recover from the day's labors. It was to enter a space where truths could be revealed, where guidance could be sought, and where the unseen currents of fate might brush against the mind. Imagine lying in the stillness of a Viking night, the fire's light dimming, and the world slipping away. In your dream, you walk along a shoreline lit by the pale shimmer of the aurora. A figure stands ahead, half in shadow, half in light, speaking words you can almost hear. You wake in the quiet middle hours, heart steady, mind turning over the vision. Around you, others sleep, but a few are awake, tending the fire or speaking in hushed voices. You lean toward them and begin to tell your dream. In the next part, we will explore another dimension of their rest, how the food they ate and the times at which they ate it created the perfect conditions for deep and lasting sleep. What the Vikings ate, and when they ate it, played a quiet but powerful role in the depth and quality of their sleep. Their diet, shaped by the northern climate and the rhythm of the seasons, nourished the body in ways that naturally supported rest, even if they did not speak of it in the terms we use today. The evening meal was often the day's largest. After the work was done, whether it was tending the fields, mending nets, or preparing goods for trade, the household gathered around the central hearth. The food was hearty, warm, and slow to digest. Exactly the kind of fare that calms the body and signals it to prepare for rest. Thick stews made from barley, root vegetables, and meat simmered for hours, their flavors deepening as the fire burned low. Fish, fresh or preserved, often featured on the table, rich in natural oils that modern science tells us help regulate the sleep cycle. In the cold months, the meal might include roasted lamb or pork with fats that provided both energy and insulation against the winter chill. These heavier foods, eaten in the stillness of evening, encouraged a natural winding down. After eating, there was no rush into noisy activity. People stayed close to the hearth, talking quietly or working with their hands, giving the body time to shift gradually towards sleep. They also made use of herbs and plants known for their calming effects. Chamomile, yarrow, and valerian root, plants still used today for rest, grew in their meadows and were sometimes brewed into teas or added to food. The warmth of such a drink before bed would have eased the body into relaxation, even if they thought of it simply as tradition. Grain-based foods such as bread or porridge were a staple, and when eaten in the evening, their slow-release energy kept the body satisfied through the long night. Combined with protein and fat, this balance prevented the kind of hunger waking that can interrupt sleep. Sweetness came sparingly. Honey in small amounts, often as part of a medicinal mixture or to flavor a special dish. Without the constant presence of refined sugar, their blood sugar levels remained steady, avoiding the restless wakefulness that comes from sudden spikes and drops. Fermented foods were another quiet ally to rest. Sauerkraut, fermented fish, and even mead introduced beneficial bacteria into the gut, which modern science now links to better mood and sleep quality. Mead itself, while alcoholic, was usually consumed in moderation during ordinary evenings, enough to warm the body and relax the mind, but not in the quantities that would disturb deep sleep. Timing mattered too. Meals were tied to daylight and the demands of work. In winter, the main evening meal might be eaten soon after dark, giving several hours before the first phase of sleep. In summer, when the light lingered, eating might happen later, but the long hours of labor still ensured that when the head met the pillow, the body was ready. Perhaps most importantly, eating was communal. The shared act of sitting together, speaking softly, and enjoying food by firelight created an emotional calm that helped prepare the mind for rest. There was no rushing, no eating alone in front of a glowing screen, no irregular snacking through the night. The structure of their meals supported the structure of their sleep. Picture it: the flicker of firelight on wooden bowls, the steam rising from a pot of stew, the smell of herbs and roasted meat in the air. Outside, night presses close against the walls. Inside, warmth settles into the bones. The body is full, the mind is quiet, and the bed is only a few steps away. By the time the fire is banked and the blankets pulled up, sleep arrives, not as a struggle, but as the natural end to the day. In the next part, we will look at the role of physical activity, how the labor and movement of Viking daily life set the stage for the kind of deep, dreamless sleep modern people often long for. For the Vikings, movement was life. From dawn until dusk, their bodies were in motion, lifting, rowing, carrying, building, mending, walking, and often braving the elements. This constant physical activity was not exercise in the modern sense, something done for its own sake. It was woven into the work of survival and the rhythm of the seasons, and it prepared the body for sleep in a way that was as natural as breathing. A farmer might rise early to tend to the livestock, hauling water from the well, chopping wood for the day's fire, and working the fields until the sun dipped low. A fisher would push his boat into icy waters, rowing for hours and hauling in heavy nets, the salt wind biting his cheeks. A craftsperson, seated for part of the day, still moved often, fetching materials, stoking the fire, shaping wood or metal with steady, deliberate effort. Every task used the body fully, engaging muscles from the shoulders to the calves. The climate added its own weight to the day's demands. Cold air made the body work harder to stay warm. Uneven, frozen ground tested balance and endurance. Even in summer, with milder weather, the long hours of work under the open sky left the body pleasantly weary. There were no padded shoes, no ergonomic chairs, no gentle climate control, only the constant adjustment of the body to the land's demands. This kind of physical engagement created the perfect conditions for sleep. The steady, moderate exertion through the day regulated their internal clocks, syncing their bodies with the natural light. Their muscles, used to their limits, demanded rest and repair. Without artificial light to push the day late into the night, and without the sedentary hours that modern life often imposes, the body's natural sleep signals were strong and unambiguous. Even mental stress, the kind that can keep modern people staring at the ceiling, found a counterbalance in physical work. By the time the evening meal was finished and the hearth's warmth settled over the longhouse, the mind had already released the sharp edges of the day. Tired muscles and a calm mind together made falling asleep a matter of minutes, not hours. Seasonal work brought variety to their movements. In spring, planting demanded bending, kneeling, and hauling soil. In summer, fishing trips could mean rowing for hours or carrying heavy catches from shore to home. Autumn's harvest was a blend of lifting, stacking, and storing, while winter's work shifted to chopping wood, repairing gear, and tending animals in close quarters. This rotation of tasks prevented the strain and stiffness that come from repetitive, limited motion. Raiding or long voyages tested the body in different ways. Aboard a ship, the constant sway of the sea worked the core and legs, while rowing built strength and endurance. Sleep after such days came quickly, often on deck under the open sky, with the roll of the waves becoming a cradle. Even the tension of a dangerous journey could not long outlast the exhaustion of the work itself. There was also a communal energy to their labor. Most tasks were done alongside others, sowing rows of grain, hauling logs, pulling in nets. The shared pace and rhythm created a steady physical output without the lonely grind of solitary effort. And just as they worked together, they rested together, the day's collective fatigue settling over the longhouse like an unseen blanket. The Vikings did not have to seek out rest. Their bodies demanded it. Their sleep was earned with movement, and in return, that sleep restored the strength they would need again at dawn. In the next part, we will explore the role of herbal knowledge, how the Vikings used plants and natural remedies not just to heal the sick, but to prepare the body and mind for peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. The Vikings lived in close relationship with the plants that grew around them. To them, herbs were not luxuries or curiosities. They were tools for health, for healing, and for harmony with the seasons. Among their uses, some plants played a quiet but important role in guiding the body toward rest. These were the gentle allies of the night, drawn from meadow, forest, and shore. One of the most common was chamomile, a humble plant with small daisy-like flowers, known for its calming qualities. Chamomile could be brewed into a warm tea taken before bed, the steam carrying a soft, apple-like scent that eased the mind. In times of illness or restlessness, it might be given to children, helping them drift into sleep without fear. Valerian root was another, though its taste and smell were stronger, almost musky, crushed and steeped. It was believed to quiet an overactive mind and relax the body. Modern studies now confirm what the Vikings knew through practice, that valerian can help shorten the time it takes to fall asleep and deepen the quality of rest. Mugwort, a plant with silvery leaves, was valued for more than just its medicinal uses. Some believed it could invite vivid dreams or protect the sleeper from nightmares. Sprigs of it might be placed under a pillow or hung above the sleeping platform. Its sharp, earthy scent would mingle with the other smells of the longhouse: wood smoke, wool, straw, becoming part of the sensory fabric of night. Yarrow, with its clusters of white flowers, was used more often for healing wounds, but in gentler preparations it could help ease tension and discomfort that might otherwise keep someone awake. Combined with honey, it made a soothing drink for aches brought on by long days in the fields or at sea. Juniper, with its resinous, almost pine-like aroma, was sometimes burned as incense to cleanse the air and drive away illness. The smoke was thought to clear not just the space but the mind, leaving it quiet enough for rest. In some places, Juniper berries were steeped into teas or used to flavor dishes eaten at the end of the day. These remedies were not used in isolation. They were part of a broader understanding of balance. Food, warmth, work, and rest all played their part, and herbs supported that natural cycle. Preparing them was itself a calming ritual, water heated over the hearth, herbs crushed or tied in small bundles, the slow steeping while the fire crackled nearby. By the time the drink was ready, or the scent had filled the air, the body was already leaning towards sleep. Even the act of gathering herbs was bound to the seasons. In spring and summer, certain plants were collected fresh and hung to dry from the rafters of the longhouse. Their shapes and colors, bunches of green leaves, clusters of blossoms, decorated the beams, their scents mingling with the wood and smoke. Come winter, when the earth lay silent, these stored bundles became a bridge to the warmer months, their aromas a reminder of the sunlit fields where they had been picked. In using these plants, the Vikings showed an instinctive understanding of what we now call sleep hygiene. They prepared their bodies for rest not just by stopping work, but by creating an environment, through scent, taste, and ritual, that signaled safety and calm. Picture it. The night outside is dark and still. Inside, the air holds the warm smell of chamomile tea. A cup is passed from hand to hand, the steam soft against tired faces. The herbs have been chosen well, the fire is steady, and soon the longhouse will settle into quiet breathing. In the next part, we will explore another influence on their rest, the cultural attitudes towards sleep itself, and how viewing it not as lost time but as a vital part of life, shaped the way they embraced the night. In the Viking world, sleep was not treated as a weakness, nor as an indulgence to be cut short for the sake of productivity. It was understood as a natural, necessary part of life's rhythm, as essential as eating, working, or sailing the seas. This respect for rest was not written in laws or carved into runestones, but it was woven into their habits, their stories, and their understanding of health. The sagas often describe warriors and farmers alike sleeping soundly before great journeys or battles. There is no shame in these accounts, no suggestion that rest made one soft. On the contrary, the ability to rise at dawn with clear eyes and steady hands was valued, and that came only from a night of full restorative sleep. A tired mind could not navigate a ship through treacherous waters. A weary body could not swing an axe with precision or hold a shield through a long fight. In a culture where survival depended on strength, skill, and alertness, sleep was a kind of training. Each night was a preparation for the demands of the next day. Even during the busiest seasons, the need for rest was recognized. After the final tasks of the evening, securing livestock, banking the fire, sharing the last meal, there was no push to stay awake beyond what the body wanted. The longhouse would grow quiet naturally, without the glow of artificial light to tempt wakefulness. There was also a sense of communal responsibility in sleeping well. In the close quarters of a longhouse, one person's restlessness could disturb others. Respecting the quiet hours meant respecting the group's well-being. A night of good sleep for all meant a stronger household in the morning, ready to face the day's work together. For the Vikings, sleep was also tied to the spiritual and the unseen. Dreams could be messages, and night was a time when the boundaries between worlds might thin. This gave rest an almost sacred dimension. To sleep was to open oneself to guidance from gods, ancestors, or the patterns of fate, a process that required both trust and care. Preparing for sleep, then, was not just about comfort, it was about being ready for whatever the night might bring, seen or unseen. Seasonal rhythms reinforced this attitude. In winter, the long darkness invited long nights of rest without guilt. In summer, shorter nights were balanced by deep, efficient sleep brought on by the day's labors. There was no expectation to maintain the same schedule year-round. Instead, sleep followed the wheel of the year, flexible and in harmony with the land. Even in the harsher realities of their world, during voyages, raids, or times of hardship, they made space for rest when they could. A sheltered spot on a windy shore, a quiet moment on deck under a blanket, a short sleep before dawn's watch. These pauses were taken seriously. They knew that pushing too far without rest could mean the difference between survival and failure. Today, many see sleep as time stolen from achievement. The Vikings saw it as time invested in strength. They did not measure a day's worth by its waking hours alone, but by how well those hours were supported by the night before. Imagine lying in the dim glow of the hearth, knowing that tomorrow will demand your full self, your body's strength, your mind's clarity, your will's steadiness. You pull the furs closer, not out of laziness, but out of discipline. This is how you prepare. This is how you endure. In the next part, we will turn to the voyages and travels that often disrupted daily life and see how the Vikings carried their sleeping habits onto the sea and into lands far from home. Sleep on the move was a different challenge for the Vikings, but it was one they met with the same adaptability they showed in every part of life. Whether they were sailing across narrow fjords or open seas, traveling overland through forests and mountains, or stopping at foreign shores, they carried their understanding of rest with them. Even far from the warmth of the longhouse, they knew how to create the conditions for sleep. Aboard a longship, the space was limited, and the air often raw with sea spray. There were no enclosed cabins for most of the crew, only a single open deck under the sky. Sleep came in short stretches, taken between shifts at the oars or at the steering board. Sailors would lie on coiled ropes or lay down straw mats to soften the planks, wrapping themselves in thick wool cloaks and furs to guard against the cold. The ship's motion became its own lullaby, the steady rocking a rhythm that could lull even the most watchful warrior into brief, deep rest. The sound of the sea was ever present, the splash of waves against the hull, the creak of the timbers, the flap of the sail, all blended into a constant, predictable hum. This familiarity made it easier to fall asleep, despite the open air and the chill. Sometimes, in calmer waters, men would curl up beneath an oar or beside the mast, their cloaks pulled over their heads to block the wind. On longer voyages, when the ship anchored near shore, the crew might sleep on land. A flat, dry spot would be chosen, preferably sheltered from wind by rocks or trees. Fires would be lit for warmth and to keep animals away, and bedrolls made from furs, straw, or woven mats would be laid out. Even here, the same principles applied. Keep the body warm, shield the face from drafts, and rest close to others for shared heat and safety. Overland travel brought its own variations. Merchants, messengers, or raiding parties moving through forests and valleys carried what they could. Bedrolls were light but warm, often made of layered wool, and could be laid directly on the ground or atop gathered brush for insulation. Camps were chosen with care, near water but not too close to its chill, and in places where the wind could be broken by terrain. They were skilled at finding sleep, anywhere it could be taken. A shaded grove at midday, a quiet stretch of beach, a hollow between dunes, any of these could become a bed, if the moment allowed. This readiness to rest, even for short periods, kept them strong through the unpredictable demands of travel. Traveling also meant adjusting to new rhythms of light and dark. In the far north, summer voyages could bring almost endless daylight, while winter journeys southward might feel luxuriously bright compared to home. The Vikings adapted without complaint, relying on physical exhaustion and the comfort of familiar bedding and habits to fall asleep whenever the chance came. Even in foreign lands, they carried pieces of home with them. A fur cloak, a small pouch of herbs, or the practice of sharing warmth in close quarters. These kept the act of sleeping connected to the life they knew. Rest was not an afterthought. It was part of survival, a resource to be guarded as carefully as food and water. Picture them now. The ship, anchored in a quiet cove, the sail furled, the oars stowed. A fire burns low on the shore, shadows flickering against the rocks. The crew lies scattered in small clusters, some under the stars, some curled beneath the upturned hull of a smaller boat. The air smells of salt and smoke, and the night wraps itself around them like a cloak. In a few hours they will rise and push onward, but for now the sea holds them in its gentle rocking sleep. In the next part, we will step into the world of ritual and superstition, exploring how the Vikings used protective charms, prayers, and symbolic acts to guard their sleep from danger, both physical and unseen. For the Vikings, the night was not only a time for rest, it was also a time when unseen forces might stir. Just as dreams could carry messages, the darkness could hold dangers that the waking eye could not see. And so they wove small acts of protection into the way they prepared for sleep. These rituals were part habit, part belief, and part the quiet comfort of knowing they had done what they could to keep harm at bay. One of the most common forms of protection came from charms. These could be small amulets carved from bone, wood, or amber, etched with runes chosen for their guarding power. The rune alges, shaped like an upturned branch, was believed to shield the bearer from harm. Worn on a cord around the neck or tucked beneath the bedding, it served as a silent guardian through the night. Some preferred to place symbols directly onto the sleeping space. A small rune stave might be scratched into the bed frame or into a piece of wood laid beneath the pillow. These marks were not decorative. They were meant to form a barrier against wandering spirits or ill fortune. In households with children, such signs were more common, as the young were thought to be more vulnerable to harm in their dreams. Herbs also played a protective role. Bundles of juniper, mugwort, or rowan were hung near the head of the bed, their scents mingling with the warmth of the room. Juniper, in particular, was thought to drive away disease and evil spirits. Rowan had long been a tree of protection in northern Europe, its bright red berries and strong wood a sign of life and strength. A sprig of it over the doorway, or near the sleeping place, was considered a shield against malevolent forces. Prayer, too, had its place. Before lying down, some might whisper words to Thor for strength, to Frigg for the care of the home, or to the Norns for a night undisturbed by ill fate. These were not long ceremonies, but quiet, personal moments. A few words spoken into the darkness, asking for the safety of oneself and the household until the sun returned. Physical precautions were woven in as well. The longhouse doors were barred, weapons laid within easy reach. In more unsettled times, a guard might be posted through the night, walking softly along the outer wall, or watching from a nearby height. This was especially common during voyages or in frontier settlements, where the risk of attack was greater. For many, the sense of safety these rituals provided was as important as their practical effect. Knowing the amulet was in place, the herbs were hung, the prayer spoken, all of this quieted the mind, making it easier to surrender to sleep. Even if the night outside was wild with wind, or the sea roared against the shore, the sleeper could rest in the knowledge that they had done what tradition demanded. There was also a shared comfort in these practices. The sight of charms above a family's sleeping space, the familiar smell of protective herbs in the rafters, the knowledge that someone had whispered a blessing before the fire was banked, all reminded the household that they were part of something older than themselves. Picture it, the last embers glowing in the hearth, the scent of juniper smoke lingering in the air. A wooden amulet lies on the platform beside a sleeping child. Outside, the wind pushes at the walls, but inside there is warmth, and the steady breathing of those who trust the night to pass peacefully. In the next part, we will look at how these sleep traditions and beliefs were passed on, how children learned the ways of the night from their elders, and how a culture's understanding of rest was carried forward through generations. In the Viking world, the knowledge of how to live well and how to rest well was not written in books. It was carried in the voices, gestures, and habits of elders, passed down to children not through formal lessons, but through the steady rhythm of daily life. Sleep traditions, like so many other skills, were learned simply by being present, by watching and imitating, by feeling the comfort of routines repeated over countless nights. From their earliest days, children slept alongside parents, siblings, and other members of the household. The closeness provided warmth, but it also gave them a living example of how to prepare for the night. They saw how the fire was banked before bed, how cloaks and furs were arranged, how herbs were hung or teas brewed. They heard the whispered prayers, the low conversations that dwindled into silence as the longhouse settled. The sensory world of night became their classroom. The scent of wood smoke and chamomile was as much a signal for sleep as the dimming of the fire. The soft rustle of straw under blankets, the creak of the wooden frame when someone shifted, the faint murmur of breath, all these sounds and textures told them what safety and rest felt like. By the time they were old enough to sleep apart, these cues had become ingrained, their bodies and minds tuned to them without conscious thought. Stories played a role as well. Before bed, elders might tell sagas or simple tales, their voices low and steady, drawing the children's attention into a slower rhythm. Some stories carried lessons about listening to dreams, about the importance of being strong and alert in the morning, about how the gods themselves rested after great labors. Others wove in caution, warning of wandering spirits or strange animals, teaching children why certain protective charms and herbs were kept near the bed. Tasks related to sleep were given gradually. The child might first be asked to fetch fresh straw for the bedding, or to hang a sprig of rowan above the doorway. Later, they might learn to brew a calming tea, to check that the fire would last through the night, or to carve simple runes for protection. Each of these acts tied them more deeply to the traditions of the household. Seasonal changes offered further lessons. In winter, they learned the value of gathering close for warmth, of sealing drafts, of sleeping longer in the dark months without shame. In summer, they experienced shorter, lighter nights, and understood that the body could adapt to different patterns without harm. Even travel became part of their education. When the family journeyed, whether to a neighboring settlement, a market, or farther afield, children saw how their elders created a place for rest anywhere, how to choose a sleeping spot sheltered from wind, how to wrap a cloak to hold warmth, how to fall asleep to the sound of the sea or the rustle of leaves. By the time they reached adulthood, these practices were second nature. They did not need to think about how to prepare for sleep, any more than they needed to think about how to hold an oar or mend a garment. And when they had children of their own, the cycle began again, the knowledge carried forward, not as something learned once, but as something lived every night. It is easy to forget, in the modern world, how much of what we know about rest once came from watching those who came before us. For the Vikings, sleep was not a separate subject to be studied. It was part of the whole fabric of life, and it was a fabric they wove tightly, so that each generation inherited not only the strength to work, but the wisdom to recover. In the next part, we will step back and look at how the environment of the Viking homelands themselves, their skies, seasons, and landscapes, shaped the nature of their sleep in ways that no human hand could fully control. The lands the Vikings called home, from the wind-carved coasts of Norway to the sheltered fjords of Iceland, from the forests of Sweden to the rolling fields of Denmark, shaped not just how they lived, but how they slept. Nature was not a distant backdrop, it was a constant presence, pressing against the walls of the longhouse, whispering through the cracks, dictating the rhythms of light, dark, warmth, and cold. In the far north, winter nights could stretch endlessly, the sun barely lifting above the horizon, casting only a faint glow before sinking again. In such months, the long darkness wrapped itself around the people like an endless blanket. Sleep came naturally in long stretches, and the biphasic pattern, 2 sleeps with a waking period in between, fit easily into these extended hours of night. The quiet between sleeps might be spent in hushed conversation, mending clothing, or tending the fire, but the darkness kept the pace slow, the mind ready to return to rest. In summer, the opposite ruled. The light lingered late into the night, and returned early, sometimes barely fading at all. Full darkness was rare, replaced by a long, soft twilight. Sleep, then, became shorter, but often deeper. After a day of labor in the long daylight, the body would collapse into rest as soon as it was allowed, the brightness outside doing little to deter the mind's need for recovery. Thick furs or cloth could be hung to dim the sleeping space, creating a pocket of shadow in which to drift away. The climate itself was a sleeping companion. In winter, the cold seeped through the walls and floor, making warmth a nightly priority. Straw bedding provided insulation from the ground, while layers of wool and fur trapped the body's heat. Sharing sleeping platforms with others multiplied that warmth, an efficient if unspoken form of survival. In summer, the nights could still be cool, especially near the coast, but the air was gentler, and sleep might be taken with fewer coverings, the night breeze moving softly through cracks in the walls. The sounds of the environment were part of the Viking night. Along the coast, the steady rhythm of waves became a constant presence, a natural lullaby for those who lived within earshot of the sea. Inland, the wind moving through trees or the distant call of night animals set the tone for rest. In stormier seasons, the wind could roar like a living thing, rattling doors and pushing against the roof, a reminder that nature could protect or threaten, but could never be ignored. Seasonal food availability also influenced sleep indirectly. In late summer and autumn, with harvests and hunts providing plenty, people went to bed well fed, the body heavy with warmth and energy. In the leaner months of early spring, before the new growth had come, meals were lighter, and the body's rest might be more fragile. Yet even in scarcity, the habit of aligning sleep with the natural cycles of light and temperature kept rest steady enough for survival. Geography, too, played its part. Those living near fjords or sheltered valleys experienced calmer nights, the landscape itself breaking the force of the wind. On open plains or exposed coasts, the weather could shift suddenly, waking sleepers with a rush of air or the drumming of rain on the roof. Learning to fall asleep quickly and deeply, even when conditions were uncertain, was a skill honed by necessity. In all of this, the Vikings did not try to dominate their environment to make it fit their will. They adapted themselves to it. Their sleeping habits, their bedding, their schedules, their nightly rituals were born from an acceptance that the land and sky were partners in life. Some nights were warm and still, others cold and restless, but both were part of the same rhythm. In the next part, we will turn to one of the most overlooked aspects of Viking rest, the subtle role of sound, from the quiet murmur of voices to the protective noise of the hearth, and how these nighttime soundscapes shaped the way they slept. The Viking night was never truly silent. Even in the stillest hours, there was always a thread of sound, a gentle weave of noises that, rather than disturbing rest, often deepened it. These sounds were familiar, constant, and carried the reassurance that life was continuing safely around the sleeper. Inside the longhouse, the hearth was the heart of the night. Even when the fire was banked low, it murmured softly. The faint crackle of embers shifting, the occasional sigh as a piece of wood released its last heat. This was not just warmth. It was a steady companion through the darkness, a sound that told every ear in the room that the fire was alive, the home was guarded against the cold, and the night could be trusted. The breathing of others filled the space as well. In a shared sleeping platform, you could hear the deep, steady rhythm of those beside you, parents, children, siblings, or crewmates. This chorus of slow breaths was its own form of security, proof that everyone was present and alive. In the rare moment someone shifted or murmured in sleep, it only reinforced the sense of human closeness. From outside came the language of the land. On the coast, the sea spoke all night, its voice rising and falling against the shore. In calm weather, it was a slow, rhythmic hush, like the breath of a giant. In storms it roared and crashed, a reminder of power and distance, but still part of the expected order of things. Inland, the night carried the rustle of wind through grass and trees, the occasional cry of a night bird, or the far-off bark of a fox. These were not intrusions, they were the sounds of a world that the Vikings knew well. During winter storms, the wind became a presence in itself, pushing against the walls, threading through the thatch, and rattling the shutters. Yet even this could be comforting, because the sound confirmed the shelter's strength. To lie in warmth and hear the wind's fury outside was to know you were safe. On voyages, the night was stitched together by the creak of timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, and the occasional groan of a rope pulling taut. These sounds were the heartbeat of the ship, as constant and necessary as the tide itself. Sailors learned to rest with them in their ears, the patterns becoming as familiar as a lullaby. Sometimes there was deliberate sound in the night, a low hum of conversation during the waking period between two sleeps, or a quiet song sung to a restless child. Words were spoken softly, not to wake those still resting, but to fill the darkness with human presence. Lullabies in the Viking Age were often simple, repetitive, and soothing, more about tone than meaning, carrying a slow cadence that could settle both child and singer. Even the occasional disturbances, the bark of a dog at the door, the clink of a guard's weapon as they shifted position, were not entirely unwelcome. They were signs that vigilance was alive, that someone was awake to watch over those who slept. In this layered soundscape, silence was never absolute. The Vikings slept not in the absence of noise, but in the company of familiar, trusted sounds. These sounds did not demand attention. They flowed around the sleeper like a current, carrying them gently through the night. In the final part, we will gather all of these threads, not to summarize, but to rest in the quiet image of a Viking night as it might have truly been, and to let it fade like embers into the dark. The night has settled deep over the Viking world. Outside, the wind moves softly through the grass, bending it in slow waves. Above, the stars scatter across the dark like silver seeds, their light faint but steady. The sea, not far away, whispers against the shore, a sound older than the land itself. Inside the longhouse, the fire is burned low, its embers glowing like small suns hidden in the ash. The warmth still lingers, caught in the layers of wool and fur, in the bodies gathered close together. The air holds the mingled scents of smoke, straw, and herbs hung from the rafters, juniper, mugwort, chamomile, their fragrance softened by the heat. On the wide sleeping platform, the shapes of people lie close. A child stirs briefly, pressing against a parent's side, then sinks back into stillness. Someone's breathing deepens into a quiet snore. Another turns in their blanket, the straw beneath them sighing at the shift. The space hums with the steady rhythm of human life at rest. A carved amulet rests near a pillow, its runes catching the faint light. Above the door, a sprig of rowan hangs, its red berries dark in the shadow. These are the small guardians of the night, watching without eyes, speaking without words. In this moment, time feels unbroken. The people here do not think of sleep as something stolen from the day. It is part of the day, the part that renews the body, sharpens the mind, and steadies the heart. Outside, the world turns, but in here, the pace is slow and unchanging. If you listen closely, you can hear the fire's last sigh, the faint creak of the timbers, the quiet murmur of the sea beyond the walls. The night holds its breath for a moment, as though it, too, is resting. Soon, the first pale light of dawn will brush the horizon. The fire will be stirred back to life. The longhouse will fill with voices, and another day will begin, full of work, laughter, and the unending tasks of survival. But for now, the Vikings sleep, wrapped in the warmth of each other and the certainty that this rest is as necessary as the air they breathe. And so the night goes on, slow and steady, until it gives itself back to the sun. Beyond the longhouse walls, the land itself seems to sleep. The fjord lies still, its surface black and glassy, reflecting the cold shimmer of the stars. The tide is low, revealing dark ribbons of seaweed along the shore. A single gull calls somewhere in the distance, the sound carrying far in the night air before fading into silence. Inside, the warmth of the hearth has settled into the wood and stone, radiating faintly. The air is thick with the comfort of shared breath, the slow rise and fall of chests under wool and fur. Even those who wake briefly, to shift, to stir the fire, to check on the animals, move quietly, their footsteps soft against the packed earth floor. In the small hours between the first and second sleep, there is a kind of waking that is unlike daytime. It is not hurried. Those who rise do so with calm, knowing the night still belongs to them. Perhaps someone pours a little water into a cup, or pokes at the embers to coax a bit of flame for light. Two voices murmur in low conversation near the fire, speaking of nothing urgent, the weather, a dream remembered, the sound of the sea. This is a time for small, unimportant tasks. Mending a tear in clothing, carving a simple piece of wood, checking the knots that hold a door closed against the wind. The world outside is vast and dark, but in here the circle of light is small and safe. A child wakes and asks a question, half dreaming, about whether the snow will fall tomorrow. An elder answers with a quiet certainty, though the truth is the sky will decide. Soon the child's eyes close again, and the question is carried away into sleep. When the waking interval ends, there is no signal, no announcement. People drift naturally back to their bedding, the fire's glow fading to its embers once more. Blankets are pulled close, knees are drawn in, and the stillness settles again over the room. The second sleep is often the deepest, the body surrendering fully now that the night's duties are done. Outside, the tide has begun to turn, and the faintest hint of dawn waits just beyond the horizon, though it will be some hours before it reaches the sky. Here in the longhouse, nothing rushes toward the morning. Rest still has its claim, and the Vikings, in their quiet wisdom, let it hold them. The second sleep folds over the longhouse like a soft tide, and for a time the room is almost motionless, the embers under their ash glow without flame, breathing a faint, steady red. Beyond the doorboard, the fjord inhales and exhales in slow water sounds that the sleepers barely register. Their bodies have found the depth they were made for, the heavy quiet where muscles loosen, joints unknot, and the mind lets go of its last edges of thought. Hours pass, though no one counts them. The night, generous in this season, still has more to give. A dog near the threshold twitches at some scent woven through the draught, then settles again with a small, contented rumble. The straw under the sleeping platform gives when someone turns, then springs back, the sound like a dry whisper. Under the piled wool and fur, warmth pools and lingers. Above the coverings the air stays cool, and faces rest easy in it. The body understands this balance without language. It simply rests. Toward the back of the platform, an elder woman wakes, not with a start, just returning to the surface as gently as a leaf rising on water. She lifts herself on an elbow and listens. The room answers with breath. It is enough. Her knees find the edge of the boards with the assurance of long habit. And she stands. The cold under her soles is real but not unkind. She has lived too many winters to fear a floor's chill. At the hearth she kneels and rakes back the ash with a flat stick. The coals are still alive. 2 small slivers of pine, a patient wait, and then a quiet ribbon of flame grows, steadying into a small serviceable fire. It will be enough to wake with. Later, for now she shades it with her hand so it doesn't flare, then sits for a while, letting the warmth touch her knuckles. She is not thinking much of anything, only letting herself feel that she is here, that the night is holding as nights do. In the place nearest the door, a young man lies on his side facing the wall, one palm tucked under his cheek. He has a journey ahead when the light returns, a short crossing to a neighbor's cove, a thing that would be nothing in summer but in winter needs care and extra hands. He does not know he is smiling in sleep. A dream has walked him along a path of summer grass, down to the water where the stones are warm. He will half remember this later, not as a plot, just as a feeling that his feet were light and the air sweet, and that the oars were lifted from his shoulders. When he wakes, he will find that the weariness in his back is less, though he could not tell you why. The house is a small village of bodies. A baby, swaddled close to its mother, sighs and makes the soft mew that hungry infants make. The mother's hand finds the child without her eyes opening, and they settle together. A father, farther down, dreams of a boat he hasn't built yet, tracing the curve of its hull with a tool that does not slip. 2 older children sprawl in the easy carelessness of youth, feet uncovered and cool. One of them has clutched, even in sleep, a polished pebble found at the shore. These small particularities belong to them alone, but the rest belongs to the household, the warmth, the hush, the trust in the continuing dark. Outside, the sky is not yet changing, but far to the north a pale band has loosened its grip on blackness. The stars look sharper for it. A fox crosses the packed snow near the fence, setting its paws where last night's prints still dimly show. The animals in the byre shift and settle again. Nothing is in a hurry. Winter is the teacher of that lesson, and everyone has learned it well. The elder woman reaches up to the beam above the hearth and pinches a few crushed leaves from a bundle tied there, linden, dried, when the world was green. She drops them into a cup and fills it from a small pot she has moved to the fire's edge. The steam rises with the faintest sweet scent, the kind that does not announce itself so much as arrive. She takes a sip and closes her eyes. She is not chasing sleep. She has had what she needs. This is a different kind of resting, the sitting kind, the kind that belongs to those who wake before the rest and keep the house's quiet company. Hours later, or minutes, as the night measures such things, snow begins to fall again. It is a fine snow, so light that the smallest stir of air lifts it before it lands. The turf roof receives it with gratitude, a deeper quilt on an already well-made bed. The roof timber creaks as temperature nudges it another degree. The sound is honest and old. No one wakes for it. The dog does not even lift its head. The fire, left to its own rhythm, draws a thin seam of light up the smoke hole. That seam makes a mark on the dark rafters, and dies there. This is the only lamp the house needs for now. Later, when it is time to move, someone will add a thicker stick of birch or alder, and the flame will answer with cheer. But in the still small hour, the longhouse is content to glow rather than blaze. If you could stand above the sleepers and look down without disturbing them, you would see a pattern as deliberate as any woven cloth. Heaviest covers at the far end, where drafts are likeliest, lighter ones nearer the hearth. Older bodies nested nearer warmth, young ones farther out, except for the smallest, who are tucked into the safest hollows as carefully as eggs. Within the pattern, individual variations are knee-angled to ease an old ache, a hand laid over another's wrist, a gap where someone once slept and will again when a voyage ends. Nothing in this arrangement is random. The humans have learned themselves in this space, and the space has learned them back. When the first hint of morning finally loosens along the eastern ridge, it does not come with fanfare. Darkness greyens. That is all. But the grey has a promise in it, like breath seen in cold air, a sign that more is on its way. The elder woman rises to her feet once more and feeds the fire with a measured stick. The flame answers handsomely this time, and light swells, a little bowlful in the center of the house. She does not call out. She does not need to. Morning announces itself through the senses, a trace of brightness through shutters, the change in air as the fire warms it, the first soft clatter of a pot. One by one, the household lifts from second sleep, not abruptly. No bell, no iron whistle, no outrage of light, just a small stirring here, a longer breath there. A child blinks and frowns at the idea of waking, then reaches for a wooden cup before sitting upright. The young man with the summer dream opens his eyes and watches the fire shape itself. His mind puts his tasks in order without hurry. Somewhere in the stack of coverings, a quiet laugh begins, sleep's residue turning into morning's first human sound. Before anyone speaks of the day's work, there is a pause that belongs to this hour alone. The mind touches its dreams to see if any want to be remembered. A hand takes up a cup and finds it warm. The first words are ordinary and kind. Did the fire keep? Did you sleep? The answers, ordinary and kind, in return. It did. I did. And in the saying of those simple truths, the house sets its spine and lifts its head. This is how strong mornings are made, not by force, but by nights that are allowed to be nights, by darkness that is allowed to be dark, and work that is allowed to stop, and small rituals that carry more weight than they appear to. This is how people become steady enough to meet a winter day. Soon there will be boots on and breath in the cold, and axes speaking against wood. There will be fish to split, or grain to grind, or a boat to ease down its skids until water takes it. But for a few more heartbeats, the longhouse inhabits the seam between sleeping and waking, the place where the night, having given all it promised, hands the world back without complaint. Someone opens the doorboard, cold air pours in, clean as new snow, and with it a sky the color of pewter. The fox's tracks cross the yard and vanish into the birch shadows. Far off, a gull turns a single white arc and folds its wings. The elder woman nods once at the morning as if to an old acquaintance, and the house, now fully alive, begins again. The day outside has begun to unfold, but inside the longhouse, there is still a lingering echo of the night just past, a residue of warmth and slowness that clings to the walls, to the wool, to the people themselves. This is the moment after waking when the body is not yet rushed into labor, when thoughts are still soft and shaped by dreams. The fire, now burning steadily, throws a low gold light across the packed earth floor. It glances off the curve of a wooden bowl, catches the edge of an axe head resting near the wall, and warms the hands of the young man who sits close to it, leaning forward so the heat seeps into his bones. He stares into the flames for a while, his eyes unfocused, letting the flicker wash over him. It is not idleness. It is a quiet kind of gathering, a readiness forming without force. A pot has been set on the stones near the fire, its contents slow to stir. Someone drops in a pinch of dried herbs, the scent drifting through the room. It mixes with the faint tang of smoke, the earthy smell of damp wool drying by the heat, and the cold iron smell from tools that have been left by the door. This mingling of scents is the morning's signature, a reminder that the house is both shelter and workshop, both place of sleep and place of work. Children begin to murmur, their voices low and rough, from sleep. One is reluctant to leave the warmth of the bedding and wraps themselves tightly in a blanket while sipping from a wooden cup. Another is already on the floor, chasing a carved bone figure across the boards with a fingertip. There is no strict rush to dress. Winter days are short, but the tasks of the morning have been shaped by generations who understood that a body works best when it wakes fully before labor begins. Elders move more slowly, not from weakness but from habit, their pace steady and deliberate. They pass by the fire, pausing to warm their palms before stepping toward the door to look at the weather. A grey light filters in as the doorboard is lifted, the cold spilling through in a sudden breath. Outside, the snow has drifted in soft ridges, smoothed by the wind. The air bites sharply at the skin, but the stillness promises fair weather for the morning at least. Breakfast is a simple thing, often barley or oat porridge, cooked thick and plain, sometimes sweetened with dried berries or a drizzle of honey, if supplies allow. On colder days, broth left from the night before might be warmed instead, its steam carrying the memory of yesterday's meal into the new day. Eating is unhurried. Spoons move slowly, and the talk is minimal, more about the tasks ahead than anything else. When the bowls are set aside, the bedding is shaken out. Straw is turned to keep it fresh, Furs are folded or hung where air can reach them, and blankets are stacked neatly for the coming night. This act is not just about tidiness, it is about readiness, about ensuring that when darkness comes again, the sleeping place will welcome the body without discomfort. In this way, even the first tasks of the day already prepare for the next time rest will come. The young man with the boat journey ahead wraps his cloak tight, checking the leather ties with practiced fingers. He glances toward the hearth one last time before stepping into the cold, as though storing away the memory of its warmth for later. Others begin their own preparations, fetching water from the well, tending to the animals, splitting wood. Yet even as the day gains momentum, the traces of the night's quiet still guide the pace. Movements are efficient, but not frantic. Voices stay low until the sun is fully up, as though to avoid disturbing the last fragments of darkness lingering on the horizon. In the far corner, the elder woman who tended the fire in the night sits again, her back to the wall, mending a tear in a child's tunic. She hums without thinking, a sound as steady as the thread in her hands. Her eyes flick now and then to the door, gauging the light, the weather, the coming hours. She has lived through more winters than she can count, and each one has taught her that a good day begins with a good night. By midday, the longhouse will be filled with the sounds of work, the strike of tools, the shuffle of feet, the calling back and forth across the yard. But the early hours belong to a gentler rhythm, one shaped by the residue of sleep, by the way the Vikings allowed themselves to rise with patience, not force. They knew that the night was not something to push away as quickly as possible, but something to carry with them, a quiet strength under the skin. When evening comes again, and the fire is banked low, they will return to that same rhythm. The longhouse will fold back into warmth, into furs and blankets, into the soft breathing of many bodies at rest, and the cycle will repeat, not because tradition demands it, but because it is the most natural way to live in a land where the night is as much a companion as the day. As the seasons turned and the years stretched on, the Vikings did not remain bound only to their home shores. Their lives were threaded with journeys, some short, across a fjord to visit kin, some long, pushing into the unknown sea where the horizon seemed to bend away from them. And with every voyage their sleeping customs, honed by the rhythms of their homeland, were tested, reshaped, and at times quietly altered by what they found beyond. On the sea, the night belonged not to the darkness, but to the ship. Sleep was no longer stretched across a steady bed of straw and fur. It came in stolen intervals, curled against the side of the hull, or under a damp cloak, wherever the body could find balance between the sway and the wind. The creak of timbers, the snap of the sail, the slap of water against the boards, these became the new lullabies, and they were harsher than the gentle breaths and hearth murmurs of the longhouse. Still, the Vikings adapted. They learned to rest in the rhythm of waves, to wake at the slightest change in pitch, and to fall asleep again in moments when the sea allowed. When they made land in distant places, on the coasts of the British Isles, along the rivers that wound deep into the heart of Europe, on the stony beaches of Greenland, the night took on unfamiliar shapes. In the south, winter nights were shorter, the darkness less deep, the air was warmer, the sounds different, crickets instead of foxes, the smell of foreign herbs carried in the wind. Vikings who had grown used to the long embrace of winter dark sometimes found it strange to sleep through nights that seemed to hurry past, or to wake with the sky already light. Trade and contact brought not just goods, but customs. In some places, they saw bedding stuffed with feathers instead of straw, sleeping platforms made from woven reeds, or rooms with shutters that could close the light out entirely. In others, they learned of scented oils and baths taken before rest, or of sleeping mats spread directly on the ground in rooms with clay floors that held the day's warmth. These were curiosities at first, but some of these ideas travelled back with them, folded into their own ways. On rare nights in foreign halls, they slept as guests, under roofs built to a different design, surrounded by the murmur of a language not their own. The unfamiliarity could unsettle, but the Vikings understood that sleep was a kind of trust, and they treated it as such. Even in strange lands they brought their own tokens, a pouch of herbs tied near the head, a carved amulet under the pillow, or a small piece of fur from home. These talismans were less about magic and more about memory, a way to carry the comfort of the longhouse into places where the night smelled and sounded different. Some changes were slow, so slow that no one could point to the day they began, a feather-stuffed pillow here, A different herb added to the night tea there, a habit of rising earlier in the southern months, when the air was already warm, or of hanging heavy cloth over the sleeping space in summer to block the light. These were small things, but they showed how even the most steadfast traditions could bend and flow like water without losing their shape. And yet, for all that they learned and borrowed, the core of their sleeping life remained. Whether on a rolling deck in the North Sea, or in a foreign merchant's hall, they sought the same essentials: the closeness of others for warmth, the steady comfort of familiar objects, the acceptance of night as a time not to be conquered, but to be lived within. The world might shift around them, but the body still needed what it had always needed: warmth, safety, and the slow unwinding that only comes when the mind believes it is home. When they returned from their travels, they carried not only goods but stories of how others lived and slept. Around the hearth in the deep heart of winter, these tales were shared of the soft down beds in far-off lands, of nights lit by oil lamps that burned until morning, of summers where the air stayed warm long after the sun was gone. The younger ones listened wide-eyed, imagining these distant nights, but when they curled up to sleep afterward, it was on the same straw and fur, under the same rafters, to the same old songs of wind and fire. Because no matter where they went, the Vikings knew something that many in later centuries would forget: that good sleep was not only a gift of comfort, but a foundation of strength. It was the hidden half of their endurance, the quiet force that made their days possible, and whether they lay under the vast cold stars of home or in the shadow of foreign walls, they carried that truth with them, night after night. Generations have a way of softening sharp edges. The men and women who once sailed restless seas, sleeping in brief snatches between the rise and fall of waves, began to settle into steadier rhythms as their children and grandchildren took root in the lands they claimed. Villages grew where there had once been only scattered farms, and with them came halls and homes built more for comfort than for constant readiness to move. The longhouse still stood at the center of life, but in some places it changed. Walls became thicker, roofs better sealed, sleeping platforms more carefully built. Bedding was renewed more often, with straw replaced before it grew too old and sharp, sometimes mixed with feathers or softer plants gathered in summer. The smell of the sleeping space grew less of damp earth, and more of clean wood and dried herbs. People still slept together for warmth, but there was more space now. Families might have their own corners, curtained off for privacy, a small luxury unknown to their wandering ancestors. The lessons from far-off lands, once curiosities, now became ordinary. Feather-stuffed pillows, once rare, appeared in more homes. Heavy woven cloths, dyed deep colors, hung from walls to block drafts and soften the night air. Oil lamps burned longer into the evening, casting a warmer light than the fire alone. And in some places, the rhythm of the night itself shifted. The biphasic sleep that had once been a necessity in the long northern darkness began to give way to longer, uninterrupted rest, especially in the milder south. But change did not erase memory. Elders still told of the old ways, how, in the far winters, the night could stretch so long that you woke and worked and slept again before the dawn. They spoke of the way a house full of sleeping bodies could hold the heat through the coldest storms, of the comfort in hearing the breathing of kin beside you. These memories were not told as laments for a lost time, but as part of the lineage, a reminder that rest had always been as vital to survival as food or fire. The younger generations grew up in a quieter world. They learned trades that kept them near home more often than not: farming, weaving, smithing, and their sleep was less often broken by the need to guard a ship or a herd in the dead of night. Still, there were echoes of the old readiness in the way they lay down: a cloak folded neatly near the bedding in case of sudden travel, a knife within reach, a habit of listening, even in half-sleep, for sounds beyond the walls. These were the traces of centuries when a night's rest was never taken for granted. In the coastal villages, the soundscape of sleep remained tied to the sea. Even without the urgency of raiding voyages, fishing and trade kept the connection alive. Children learned to fall asleep to the murmur of water in the harbour, to the gentle knock of boats against wooden piers, to the creak of ropes swaying in the wind. Inland, the rhythm was different: the sigh of wind through forests, the far-off calls of night animals, the low hum of a fire burning slow. Seasons still shaped rest. Summer brought shorter nights, but now shutters and heavy cloth could block out the lingering light, letting sleep stretch a little longer. Winter still wrapped the land in deep darkness, but the homes were warmer and the cold less biting. The work was still hard, but there was less of the constant hunger that had once haunted the cold months. With full bellies and strong walls, the night became less of a test and more of a gift. By now, the Viking Age, as later historians would call it, was giving way to something else. The restless voyages grew fewer, the settlements more permanent. The need to adapt to foreign nights was replaced by the comfort of a familiar one. And yet the wisdom remained, the understanding that rest was not idleness, but the quiet strength that made life possible. In the low hours when the fire had burned to embers and the breath of the sleepers filled the dark, the old and the new ways of the night met in silence. The closeness of bodies, the safety of walls, the slow turning of seasons, all of it folded into the same truth. Their seafaring forebears had known, but sleep, well kept and unbroken by fear, was one of the richest treasures a people could hold. As the years slid further from the high tide of the Viking Age, the North began to take on new shapes. The old pagan gods faded into whispers, as Christianity spread across the fjords and valleys, carried by traders, priests and kings, who saw not only faith, but also unity in a shared religion. Churches rose where sacred groves once stood, their bells marking hours in ways the sun and seasons once had, and with them came subtle changes to the way people lived, and quietly, to the way they slept. The longhouse, with its shared space and ever-burning hearth, was no longer the only kind of home. More and more families built smaller houses, divided into separate rooms. The sleeping platform, once a great communal bench along the wall, gave way to raised beds for couples, alcoves for children, and benches that could be cleared of tools and sat upon during the day. These changes allowed for more privacy, but also meant the loss of the warm press of many bodies in winter. To keep out the cold, thicker walls were built, and chimneys replaced smoke holes, letting fires burn more cleanly. The scent of herbs still hung in the rafters, but the air was different, less heavy with smoke, less mingled with the breath of so many sleepers together. With the influence of the church came new rhythms to the night. Bells called people to prayer before dawn, and in monasteries, monks rose in the dark hours to chant in candlelight. The idea that the night should be divided not only by rest, but by devotion slowly filtered into village life. In some places, the old pattern of 2 sleeps began to carry a different meaning. The waking time in the middle of the night was no longer simply for mending nets, telling quiet stories or tending the fire. It became a time for prayer, for quiet reflection, for whispering one's needs to a god who now watched over them in place of the older gods. Trade continued, and with it came goods from far-off lands, thicker wool from the south, finer linens from the east, and on rare occasions, rich imported blankets, woven with intricate patterns. Bedding grew softer, though still practical, designed to last through long winters. Feather pillows became more common, especially in wealthier homes, and travelers returning from the continent brought stories of mattresses stuffed not with straw but with down, so warm that the sleeper scarcely felt the cold at all. The soundscape of the night shifted too. In villages with churches, the faint toll of a bell might be heard in the distance, marking the hour. In places near growing towns, voices sometimes carried on the air later into the evening. Merchants closing stalls, guards walking the streets. Yet in the smaller settlements, the deep quiet of the Viking night still lingered, broken only by the wind and the occasional bark of a dog. Some of the older customs persisted without thought. People still hung protective charms near their beds, though now they might be crosses instead of runes. Herbs were still burned or hung in doorways to keep illness away, and on the longest nights of winter, families still gathered close to share warmth. The idea that the night should be embraced, not feared, remained strong. It was still a time to recover, to dream, to store strength for the day to come. But there were losses, too. The closeness of the shared longhouse, with its deep communal breathing, and the hum of many lives intertwined, became less common. Privacy brought comfort in some ways, but it also brought a quiet that could feel lonely. For those who had known the press of kin beside them through the dark, sleeping alone or with only a spouse could feel strangely hollow. The elders would sometimes speak of it in half-joking tones, that the new houses were warmer for the walls, but colder for the heart. Still, the essence of the old Viking night did not vanish. It lived on in the habits passed down, in the way fires were banked to last until morning, in the herbs crushed into bedding, in the instinct to wake and listen to the house before returning to sleep. And it lived on in the understanding that rest was not wasted time but a part of living well, a lesson that neither new religion nor new architecture could erase. In this way, the night carried forward, shaped by change but never entirely broken. The darkness that had cradled their ancestors still lay over the land each evening, and beneath it, people still sought the same gifts: warmth, safety, and the quiet peace of a body at ease. And though the world outside was shifting towards something new, the heart of the northern night remained the same, a slow breath between the labours of the day. By the high medieval period, the Viking Age was no longer a living memory, it was a story. The men and women who once pushed their ships into icy seas were now the heroes of sagas, their deeds sung in halls and written for the first time into vellum by patient scribes. But woven among the tales of battles and voyages were smaller, quieter details: how they lived, how they worked, and how they slept. These details, though rarely given the same grandeur as a sword fight or a storm at sea, carried the shape of a way of life that still lingered in corners of the north. The homes of this era were different from the old longhouses. Stone foundations were more common, timber walls sturdier, and separate rooms for sleeping were no longer unusual. Wealthier families had carved wooden bed frames, sometimes with curtains that could be drawn to keep warmth in. Poorer folk still made do with benches, lofts, or straw pallets on the floor, but even these were improved from generations past. Cleaner straw, thicker coverings, and, in many places, feather-filled bolsters that had once been rare luxuries. In towns and larger villages, the rhythm of sleep was shaped not just by the sun and the seasons, but by human activity. Streets lit by flickering torches might hum faintly even after dark, and church bells marked the night hours with a soft, steady measure. In the countryside, the darkness was still deeper, but even here the old Viking custom of biphasic sleep had begun to fade. People still woke in the night from habit, but many now stayed in bed, turning over and drifting back into unbroken rest, a change brought on by warmer homes, better bedding, and the pull of busier days that demanded longer stretches of sleep. Yet echoes of the old ways survived in ritual and superstition. In certain valleys, families still gathered close on the longest nights, sleeping in one room as their ancestors had, more for tradition than necessity. In fishing villages, some still hung herbs by the bed, not only for their scent, but to calm the night spirits, a belief that blended old pagan charms with newer Christian blessings. Travelers spoke of villages in the far north where, in deep winter, people still rose halfway through the night to tend the fire, share a warm drink, and talk softly before returning to sleep. Language, too, kept the memory alive. Old sayings survived in the speech of the people. A warm night makes a strong day, or sleep like the sea in winter. Slow and deep. These phrases were used without thought, their origins in the Viking night mostly forgotten, but the truths they carried remained the same. The sagas themselves sometimes hinted at the value placed on rest. Heroes returned from long journeys were not just given food and drink, but a place to sleep, as warm as the heart of the house, before they were asked to speak of their travels. Sleep was part of honor, a gift to be offered to the weary. The storytellers rarely lingered on the details, but those who listened could imagine the fire, the furs, the close walls, the darkness beyond the door. In monasteries where records were kept more carefully, notes survive of how the northern nights shaped daily life. Monks in far-off Europe wrote with mild astonishment about the length of winter darkness in the north, and how the people there seemed to thrive in it. They spoke of homes built to cradle warmth, of families sleeping together without shame, of a peace in the night that was foreign to busier, more restless lands. These writings preserved, in a roundabout way, the Viking understanding that the night was not an enemy to endure, but an ally to embrace. By now the old longhouse sleep was rare, but not gone. In the farthest reaches, beyond the pull of growing towns and trade routes, winter still came as it always had, slow, deep, and cold, and in those places, families still banked the fire before lying down together, the air scented with herbs and smoke, the night stretching out like a great woolen blanket over the land. When they rose in the dark to stir the coals or share a quiet moment, they were unknowingly keeping alive a custom that had travelled through centuries, unchanged in its heart. In this way, the Viking night lived on, not as the centre of the world, but as a thread running quietly through it, worn perhaps, but unbroken. By the late medieval period, the world of the North had shifted into something its Viking ancestors might scarcely recognize. Ships still sailed, but they were merchant cogs and fishing boats more often than dragon-proud warships. Villages had grown into towns, towns into small cities, and with this growth came the pulse of life regulated not only by the sun and seasons, but by human invention. One of the most profound changes arrived quietly, almost without notice: mechanical clocks. At first, they were rare wonders, great wooden or iron machines set high in church towers, their gears turning with the slow certainty of time itself. Bells rang at precise intervals, calling people to prayer, marking the hours of work, and, in doing so, slowly drawing the night into a fixed schedule. Where once sleep followed the natural arc of darkness and light, now it was nudged and reshaped by the sound of metal striking metal in the heart of the town. In larger settlements, the night was no longer entirely dark. Torches burned in the streets, lanterns hung outside inns, and the glow of hearths spilled from windows into the alleys. This faint light softened the edge of night, making it easier to stay awake longer and harder to sleep as deeply as before. The quiet, which had once wrapped itself around the sleeping body like a second blanket, was broken by footsteps, wagon wheels, and the murmur of voices moving even after sunset. With growing trade came longer working hours. Fishermen, merchants, and craftsmen often rose before dawn to prepare their goods for market, and some worked by lamplight well into the evening. The unhurried pace of rising from a longhouse bed, stirring the embers and easing into the day was replaced by the press of deadlines. And with that press, the old two-part sleep of the Viking night began to fade more quickly. There was little time to linger awake in the middle hours. Most people now sought one solid stretch of rest before the bell called them to labor again. In rural places, the change came slower. Farmers still shaped their days around the light, and in winter the long darkness allowed for something closer to the old rhythm. But even here, the influence of the towns crept in. Markets demanded early starts. Taxes required meetings, and church bells reached far into the countryside. A family might still rise briefly in the night to tend the fire or check on animals, but the waking was shorter, more purposeful, and without the quiet drifting conversations of old. The materials of sleep changed too. In wealthier homes, beds were no longer just straw or feathers in a wooden frame. They became layered with linens, quilts, and cushions. Curtains or canopies enclosed the sleeper in warmth and privacy. For the poor, bedding was still humble, but trade brought more durable fabrics, and even the simplest homes could sometimes afford a softer mattress than their forebears had known. Comfort was increasing, but in a strange way, so was distance. Where once warmth came from the nearness of many bodies together, now it came from fabric and craft. Some customs persisted as ghosts of the Viking night. Herbs were still placed under pillows, but now they were spoken of in terms of Christian blessing rather than pagan warding. Families still told stories by firelight, but they were more often moral tales or saints' lives than the sagas of the old gods. The instinct to prepare for the night remained, to set the fire, close the shutters and gather in, but it was now framed by the idea that the night was a pause between obligations, not a space to live within. In some of the oldest households, elders still remembered, or claimed to remember, hearing their grandparents speak of the old sleep, 2 stretches, with a waking in between, when time itself seemed to loosen. They would speak of it wistfully, as though recalling a lost season. Younger listeners found it strange, even impractical, in a world where the clock now ruled the day, and the bell broke the night. And yet, deep in winter, when the snow lay heavy and the cold pressed hard against the walls, some of the old ways stirred again. Families would find themselves lingering longer by the fire, letting conversation drift into the small hours, rising again before dawn, for reasons they could not quite name. In these moments, without meaning to, they were keeping a fragment of the Viking night alive, not as a tradition but as something the body remembered, even if the mind had forgotten. The darkness still came, and with it the need for rest. But now, it came into a world where time had hands that turned in circles, where light could be summoned at will, and where sleep was no longer shaped entirely by the sky. The night was changing, and with it, the memory of how it had once been was fading into something quieter, softer, a story more than a living truth. By the early modern era, the North had entered a new kind of life, one no longer guided entirely by the slow turning of seasons and the rise and fall of daylight. Trade routes were busier than ever. Towns swelled into small cities, and the hum of work began to stretch beyond the boundaries that had once held it. The night, once a realm for rest and quiet labor, was becoming something different. The change was most visible in the growing towns and ports. Streets were lit not just by torches and lanterns, but by newer oil lamps that burned with a steadier, brighter flame. Windows glowed longer into the evening, the light spilling into the streets and chasing away the thick, sheltering darkness. This illumination brought safety for travelers and extended hours for merchants, but it also changed the nature of the night itself. The deep silence and stillness that had once settled over the land was replaced by a low, constant activity. Sleep, which had always belonged to the rhythm of darkness, now had to compete with light that refused to leave. Clocks, once rare marvels, became more common. In churches, in markets, in grand homes, their ticking hands measured time with an exactness the sky never demanded. The bells that rang at set hours were now a daily framework, and work was increasingly expected to fit within those fixed intervals. In this new order, the old two-part sleep of the Viking night, with its gentle waking in the middle hours, became more impractical. Laborers, sailors, and tradesmen needed solid, uninterrupted rest to meet the rigid schedules of the day. Even in rural villages, where life still leaned on the land's cycles, the reach of the clock could be felt. Beds, too, had transformed. In prosperous homes, they were crafted with carved headboards and layered with fine linens, heavy quilts and embroidered pillows. The comfort was unmatched by the simple straw pallets of the past. Yet there was something more private, even isolating about this way of sleeping. Where once warmth came from the shared body heat of kin under one roof, now it came from fabrics, feathers, and fire kept burning in a single room. Families still gathered close in poorer households, but even they began to shift towards smaller sleeping spaces when they could. The customs surrounding sleep retained faint echoes of the old ways. Some still placed herbs in their bedding, lavender, rosemary, or juniper, but now it was as much for scent as for warding spirits. The act of banking the fire before bed remained, though in towns with street lamps and bustling inns, the darkness outside was no longer total. People still closed shutters and doors against the cold, but the night beyond felt less like an endless mystery, and more like a busy marketplace winding down. Folklore carried traces of the Viking night forward. Old sayings survived in speech: rest deep as midwinter, or the night gives the day its strength, though most no longer thought about where these words came from. In some remote fishing villages, the biphasic sleep pattern still lingered, especially in the long, dark winters, but it was increasingly rare. Travelers from the cities often found it odd, even quaint, that people would rise in the middle of the night to drink warm ale, mend nets, or simply sit by the fire before lying down again. For the most part, sleep was now shaped by work and light, not by the body's ancient rhythm. Artificial illumination allowed for tasks to continue well past sunset. The line between day and night blurred, and with it, the deep, deliberate pace of the old nocturnal hours began to vanish. In the cities, taverns stayed open late, ships were loaded by lamplight, and the hum of life never fully stopped. Even in the countryside, winter evenings were filled with spinning, sewing, or reading by candle, small, quiet labors that once would have been saved for the waking hours between the first and second sleep. Yet in the far north, where winter still pressed down for months, the old ways found refuge. In tiny coastal settlements, where the snow muffled every sound and the sea lay frozen under the stars, the biphasic rhythm could still be felt. Families would wake in the deep night, share food or talk in low voices, and then return to the warmth of their bedding. They did not call it tradition. It was simply what the darkness and the body required. By this time, the Viking Age was a distant legend. Its sleeping customs, once as practical and enduring as the timber walls of a longhouse, were mostly gone from daily life. But in those rare, quiet places where the modern world had not yet pressed too hard, the night still moved at the pace it always had, slow, deep, and shaped by the pull of the earth's turning. And for those who lived in such places, the rest they found was much the same as their ancestors had known, not just an escape from the day, but a way of being fully alive in the dark. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the final living threads of Viking-era sleep had almost vanished. The North had entered an age of industry, where the hum of human labor no longer paused simply because the sun had set. New machines churned through the hours, cities glowed with the light of gas lamps, and the deep, natural darkness that had once shaped the rhythm of life grew rare, even in winter. The spread of artificial lighting, first oil, then gas, was perhaps the most profound change to the night since the arrival of the clock. In towns and growing cities, streets shone with a steady, flickering glow long after sunset. Shops stayed open late, theatres and taverns thrived into the small hours, and the night became a place of business and entertainment rather than just rest. Even homes embraced this new power. Gaslight hissed in parlours and bedrooms, allowing reading, sewing, and conversation to continue far past the time when, in centuries past, families would have been bundled under blankets by the hearth. The industrial schedule demanded a different kind of rest. Factories called workers in at dawn and released them only at dusk, or, in some cases, demanded labor in rotating shifts that ignored the natural cycle altogether. The biphasic sleep of the old northern nights, with its gentle waking in the middle hours, was no longer compatible with this relentless pace. People now sought one solid block of sleep, crammed between work and the demands of the household. The unhurried conversations, the slow tending of the fire, the quiet moments of thought in the dark. These were luxuries the new world had little room for. Beds themselves reflected the change in values. In wealthier homes, ornate bed frames stood as symbols of prosperity, piled high with feather mattresses, quilts and lace-trimmed linens. In boarding houses and workers' cottages, beds were simpler but increasingly standardized, built for efficiency, and packed into rooms with little space between them. Warmth now came from bricks heated by the fire, bottles filled with hot water, and heavy cloth, rather than from the shared breath and body heat of many sleepers under one roof. Privacy had become the norm, but with it came a kind of separation from the communal night. In rural areas, the transformation was slower but still inevitable. Candles and oil lamps lit the long evenings, and winter work extended into what had once been hours of quiet. Knitting, mending, and even small-scale manufacturing filled the nights, as households sought to keep pace with markets that no longer paused for the seasons. Stories were still told by the fire, but they were often shorter, the tellers glancing at clocks instead of letting the tale unfold until the embers cooled. Folklore still carried faint echoes of the Viking night. Old sayings survived in speech, reminders that rest was strength, that the dark was a friend if you knew how to live in it. But their meaning was often faded, their origins forgotten. A few scholars began to take an interest in the customs of earlier centuries, collecting the tales of elders in remote fishing villages and farming valleys. They wrote of strange sleeping patterns, of people waking in the middle of the night as if by instinct, of gatherings in the dark hours that blurred the line between waking and dreaming. These accounts were treated as curiosities, relics of a less civilized time. And yet, in certain far-flung places, especially in the deep winter months, the old rhythm still stirred, in cabins on the edge of the forest, or on isolated islands where storms cut off travel for weeks. Families still found themselves rising in the night, to tend the fire, to share a mug of something warm, to sit and talk softly before returning to bed. They did not think of it as keeping tradition. It was simply what the long dark and the body's memory demanded. By now, the Viking Age was not even a memory. It was history. Museums displayed artifacts behind glass. Sagas were translated and printed for curious readers. The Longhouse was something to visit on a tour, not to live in. But in the silence of a few remote winter nights, there were moments when the past reached through. The flicker of firelight, the creak of timbers, the warmth of many bodies close together against the cold. And in those moments, though no one called it by its name, the Viking night still breathed. The 20th century arrived with wires strung across the sky and light bulbs blooming like small suns in every window. Electricity spread quickly through cities, then towns, then into rural settlements, carrying with it a transformation that was as quiet as it was complete. Night, as the Vikings had known it, was gone. Darkness no longer held sway over the hours between dusk and dawn. The flick of a switch could scatter it instantly. In the early years, electric light was a marvel, a symbol of progress and modernity. Families gathered under bright lamps to read, to talk, to work. Factories no longer closed with the sunset. Their windows glowed into the early morning, machines turning without pause. Shops stayed open later. Cinemas invited people into warm, bright rooms long after the stars were out, and streets were lit so well that the moon became almost ornamental. This abundance of light changed the very meaning of the night. It was no longer a time set apart for rest, but an extension of the day. The body, however, did not evolve to match this new world overnight. People still felt the pull of natural rhythms, still found themselves drifting towards sleep when darkness should have come, even when the lamps were blazing. But the demands of work, the allure of entertainment, and the culture of constant activity encouraged shorter nights, later bedtimes, and earlier mornings. The idea of a single, continuous sleep became the norm for most, reinforced by the industrial schedule and the belief in efficiency as a virtue. The gentle, two-part rest of the Viking night was now a memory only scholars and folklorists spoke of. Beds grew softer, rooms more private, and sleep itself became something increasingly solitary. Families no longer shared large sleeping spaces unless necessity demanded it. The warmth of the night came from electric heaters, heavy blankets, and insulated walls, not from the shared breath of a dozen sleepers huddled against winter's bite. Silence, too, was different. In cities, the hum of electrical lines, the rumble of traffic, and the glow of neon replaced the quiet breathing of kin and the slow sigh of the wind outside the longhouse walls. Science entered the conversation. In the mid-20th century, researchers began studying sleep as a measurable biological process. They spoke of cycles, REM stages, and brain waves. Sleep was analyzed, timed, and in some cases, optimized, something to be managed rather than simply experienced. A few researchers stumbled across historical accounts of biphasic sleep and wondered if modern humans had lost something essential. They noted that when people lived without artificial light, their sleep often fell into two parts, just as the Vikings had known. Yet in the electric age, this pattern was seen more as an oddity than a guide to healthier rest. In rural pockets of the far north, winter still carried its old weight. Even with electric light, the darkness pressed close, and the long nights sometimes coaxed people into rhythms their ancestors would have recognized. They might sleep for a few hours, wake naturally in the quiet, drink tea or coffee, talk softly, and then return to bed. But in most places, such habits were unusual, even frowned upon, in a culture that prized uninterrupted sleep as a marker of good health and productivity. The stories of Viking nights, the warmth of the longhouse, the safety of sleeping together, the peace of the waking interval became the stuff of books, museums, and the occasional romantic imagination. They were painted as quaint, even primitive, by a society that measured progress in watts and factory output. Yet there were always a few who looked back and saw not backwardness, but balance, a life shaped by the sky, the season, and the body's own wisdom, rather than by the hands of a clock or the pull of a glowing filament. By the end of the century, sleep itself had become something people fought for. In a world of shift work, television, and round-the-clock business, getting enough rest was no longer a given. It was an achievement. The irony was sharp in an age of comfort, with beds softer than any Viking could imagine, and rooms warm against the coldest winter. People slept less, and often woke more tired than those who had lain on straw under furs centuries before. The night still came, but it was no longer the deep, unbroken companion it had once been. For most, it was something to fit between tasks, a pause rather than a world unto itself. And yet, in quiet places, or on certain winter nights when the power failed and darkness returned in full, the old pattern could still reassert itself. People would light candles, gather together, talk softly, and drift into a rest that felt strangely familiar, as if some deep memory of the Viking night had been waiting all along, just beneath the surface. The 21st century arrived with a glow not just from lamps and streetlights, but from millions of tiny screens held in human hands. The night was no longer only lit by bulbs on the ceiling. It was lit by phones, tablets, and computer monitors, each one casting its own cold blue light deep into the hours when darkness once ruled. Where the Viking night had been a time for the body to surrender to the rhythm of the earth, the modern night was crowded with endless noise, messages, images, and obligations that followed people even into bed. For many, the day never truly ended. Work emails were answered from the pillow, entertainment streamed until eyes blurred, and news arrived in the quiet hours with the same urgency as it did in daylight. The stillness that once came naturally was now something to be chased, a thing that had to be scheduled, defended, or purchased in the form of sleep aids and blackout curtains. The body, tuned over thousands of years to the slow arc of light and dark, struggled to find its footing in a world where the sun's cycle no longer held authority. Science confirmed what the old ways had always known, that the human body carries a deep, natural rhythm, one that responds to darkness by producing melatonin, to light by waking gently. Researchers studying sleep patterns in communities without electricity found that people often drifted toward the same two-part rest the Vikings once knew, with a calm, waking interval in the middle of the night. These findings made headlines in certain corners of the internet, where a growing movement began to speak of ancestral sleep and the possibility of reclaiming it in the modern age. Yet for most, such rhythms remained out of reach. Cities hummed without pause, their skies pale even at midnight from the glow of street lamps and billboards. The rural dark still existed, but it was fractured by the light of distant houses, headlights sweeping across roads, and the quiet buzz of appliances that never truly rested. Even in remote places, phones and internet connections brought the busy chatter of the world into the bedroom. Beds, now engineered for ultimate comfort, promised deep rest, memory foam, temperature control, breathable fabrics. Yet sleep itself became more elusive. Many lay awake despite every comfort, the mind restless in a way the body could not ease. Where Viking sleepers had been lulled by the sounds of wind and the breathing of those beside them, modern sleepers often lay in silence that felt thin, or in noise that never truly faded. Still, there were moments, small, rare moments, when the old night returned. During winter power outages, when the electric hum fell away, and the only light came from fire or candle, families found themselves gathering close, speaking softly, watching the shadows on the walls. In those hours the body slipped naturally into the ancient rhythm. Sleep, wake gently, sleep again. No alarms, no harsh light, no ticking clock. Only the slow pulse of time as it had been for centuries. A few modern seekers began to shape their lives intentionally around this older rhythm. They dimmed their homes after sunset, turned off devices, and allowed themselves to wake in the middle of the night without guilt or worry. They read, wrote, prayed, or simply sat in the quiet, then returned to bed. For them this was not nostalgia, but a reclamation, a way of re-entering a relationship with the night that the Vikings, and countless others before them, had taken for granted. And so, in the 21st century, the Viking night lives not in necessity, but in choice. It is something that must be made, not simply fallen into. The longhouse is gone, the fjords silent, except for the occasional ship, and the stars dimmed by the haze of modern light. But in the spaces where darkness is allowed to breathe, where sleep is not hurried but welcomed in its own shape, the past still speaks, not as history, but as a living rhythm waiting for those who remember to listen. Night has always been more than the absence of day. For the Vikings it was a world unto itself, a place of safety, warmth, and unhurried time woven into the fabric of life, as surely as the sea and the seasons. They did not rush through it, they moved with it, letting the dark shape their hours as naturally as breathing. In the longhouse, the rhythm was steady. The first sleep, the waking interval, the second sleep. Between them, the quiet, filled with embers glowing in the hearth, the soft murmur of voices, the rustle of straw and furs. Now centuries later, the night is different. In cities glow where once only the moon and stars shone. The deep, still dark is rare, often broken by the flicker of screens or the hum of machines. Most sleep in single, continuous blocks, chasing rest in a world that rarely allows it to settle. The night has been reshaped by invention, by commerce, by the endless pulse of human activity, and yet, the body remembers. Somewhere in our bones, the old pattern lingers, the slow yielding to darkness, the gentle waking in the middle hours, the way time can stretch when it is not forced into the shapes of clocks and calendars. It waits in the spaces where modern light has not reached, in the rare hours when the noise of the world falls silent. Perhaps this is why, when the power goes out, or when we find ourselves in some remote place far from street lamps and alarms, we feel a calm we cannot quite name. We slip into the pace of the old night without thinking, our eyes adjusting to the dark, our voices softening, our movements slowing. We find ourselves sleeping deeply, waking gently, and then sleeping again, as if the centuries between had never passed. The Vikings did not have a word for this way of resting. To them it was simply life. They needed no reminder that the night was as vital as the day, that rest was not a luxury but a foundation. In their world, The dark was not something to escape. It was something to enter, to live within, to trust. And perhaps, even now we can find our way back to it, not to the longhouse or the fjord, not to the exact lives they lived, but to the understanding they carried, that sleep is not just recovery from the day, but a time in which we belong wholly to ourselves. That the night, when left to be what it is, holds a kind of quiet power that no invention can truly replace. Somewhere in the deep hours before dawn, there is still a place where the embers glow, the air is warm, and the darkness is complete, a place where the Viking night endures, not as a story from the past, but as a living rhythm, waiting for us to step into it again. The Viking night does not truly end, it lingers, not in the world outside, but in the memory written into the human body. Across the centuries, through the drift of inventions, wars, migrations and revolutions, something quiet has endured, the way darkness invites rest, and how the hours in between can hold their own kind of life. Even now, in an age where light can be summoned with a fingertip and the world's voices reach into every pocket, there are people who find themselves drawn back to the slower rhythm. A cabin in the mountains, a sailing voyage far from shore, a winter spent in the far north. In these places the night feels thicker, closer. The mind quiets, the air cools, the body begins, without being told, to follow the old shape of sleep, drift into darkness, wake gently, drift again. It is not nostalgia. It is not an imitation of the past. It is simply the body remembering what it has always known. And in those moments, a person lying awake in the deep hours might feel a kinship with every sleeper who came before. From the farmer in the medieval countryside to the fisherman in a longhouse by the fjord, the centuries fall away. The hum of modernity fades. Only the fires glow and the slow pull of the dark remain. When morning comes in such a place, it does not arrive with an alarm or the press of a schedule. It comes softly, as it once did. Pale light through a shutter, the smell of smoke, the first quiet stirrings of the household. The day feels less like an intrusion and more like a continuation, as if the night has given it permission to begin. This is what the Vikings understood, without naming it. The night was not simply a pause before work resumed. It was part of living, a space where the mind could wander, where warmth could be shared, where time loosened its grip. And though their world has vanished, the essence of that understanding remains within us, waiting for the rare chance to breathe. Perhaps this is why the story of Viking sleep resonates still. It is not only history, it is a reminder of what it feels like to belong to the dark, to live by its terms, to find rest in its embrace. In a world where we speak often of progress, it whispers of something older, slower, and no less valuable. The Viking night is not gone. It lives in memory, in the body's quiet instincts, and in the deep hours when the world feels as it once did, unlit, unhurried, and whole. There is a moment just before dawn when the world seems to hold its breath. The air is still, the light not yet broken, and the quiet feels as if it stretches beyond time. In the longhouse centuries ago, this was when the embers in the hearth glowed their deepest, when sleepers stirred beneath fur and wool, and when the thin edge between dream and waking felt most alive. That moment still exists. It hides in the folds of winter, in the hush of a countryside, untouched by the glare of lamps, in the gentle dark that settles over the sea on a moonless night. It waits in the places where people set aside their clocks, dim their lights, and let the night speak in its own voice. We may live in an age of constant brightness, yet the dark remains patient. It has seen the passing of centuries, the rise and fall of empires, the hum of machines, the glow of screens, and still it offers the same gift it gave to the Vikings, a place to rest, to breathe, to simply be. Step into it, and you might feel the shape of the old rhythm return. Sleep, wake, sleep again. As natural as the tide, as steady as the seasons. The walls may no longer be of timber, the roof no longer thatched, but the night does not mind. It wraps itself around you all the same. When the first light comes, it will be soft. It will find you warm, rested, and somehow older and younger at once, as if you have lived another life in the hours between. And you will rise, knowing that the Viking night is not lost, for it is not a place in history. It is a way of being, carried quietly within you, waiting only for you to remember.